/expand. Note from Deathblade. I rarely do this, but I'm going to suggest a soundtrack for this chapter. Click here for the music, then have fun reading. The hand which had grabbed Lord White and was pulling him up out of the mountain and sea realm suddenly became entangled by some invisible power which forced it to grind to a halt. An enraged roar then echoed out from the 33 heavens to fill the ears of all cultivators down below. Mountain and sea realm, what are you doing? Do you truly dare to start the war early? All of the mountains and seas were completely shaken. Even the cultivators of the 7th and 8th mountains and seas who were locked in combat, as well as those in the 6th and 5th mountains and seas, all went quiet. Fighting ceased, and all hearts felt enormous pressure weighing down on them. And yet, the main feeling was that of confusion. All of a sudden, an ancient and icy voice echoed out through all of the mountains and seas, filling the minds and hearts of all cultivators. All ye in the mountain and sea realm, I am the will of the mountain and sea realm, its spirit automaton. Each and every cultivator in the mountain and sea realm could hear the voice as clear as crystal. Oh, so many years ago, there was no mountain and sea realm in the vast expanse. There was only the paragon immortal realm, standing tall and eternal within the flow of time. It led the 3,000 lower realms, and all of its cultivators were immortals. But then catastrophe struck. The 3,000 lower realms rebelled. Other foreign powers threw the immortals into chaos, slaughtered the imperial lords, and exterminated the Tao bloodlines. The paragon immortal realm fell. Paragon 9 seals created the mountain and sea realm, forging new lands to keep the memory of the paragon immortal realm alive. That is how the mountain and sea realm came to be. The voice of the mountain and sea realm echoed out, filled with a strange power that suffused the entire realm and poured into the ears of all cultivators. Even as the mountain and sea realm spoke, the cultivators saw images in their minds, visions. Within those visions were images of the true events from the past. They were images that seemed to spring up from the very souls of the people who saw them, drawn up by the voice which filled their minds. Within those visions, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, regardless of the level of their cultivation bases, be they chi condensation or Tao realm, could clearly see the paragon immortal realm of yesteryear. They saw the peace and tranquility there, and then they saw the 3,000 lower realms rebelling. They saw the terrifying foreign powers invading the paragon immortal realm. They saw the heaven-shaking, earth-shattering war which resulted. They saw countless cultivators dying miserable deaths. They saw many who, in their last moment of life, would shout that they would live for the immortal world, and that they would die for the immortal world. Then those cultivators chose to self-detonate and end in mutual destruction with their enemies. The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm saw the blood of their ancestors in the visions. They witnessed the glory of the paragon immortal realm and its fall. They witnessed the countless corpses and brutal carnage that stretched out into the starry sky. Everyone began to tremble as the voice of the mountain and sea realm slowly faded into the background. What filled their minds were the images that had been hidden in their blood and in their souls, images that revealed to the trembling mountain and sea realm cultivators their true origins. They understood. As of this moment, everyone understood. No one doubted whether the images might be illusions. On an instinctive level, they knew that their visions were real. It was as if these images were memories, memories of their ancestors that were embedded in their souls and in their blood. From generation to generation, those memories were passed down, indelible and impossible to wipe away. It was as if they could hear the shouts of their ancestors coming from within their own blood. Never forget, we are the people of the paragon immortal realm. Fix our former glory into your hearts. Our children and grandchildren, all generations, must forever remember that our true enemies are the 33 heavens, and those beyond the 33 heavens. They are our enemies now, and will be our enemies to time indefinite. A massive roaring sound exploded out into the minds of all the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. The visions left them trembling, their eyes bloodshot, their blood and souls surging not only with the memories passed down by the ancestors but also with their rage and madness. What bitterness! They saw the collapse of the paragon immortal realm. They saw countless deaths. They saw the starry sky become a sea of blood, and they saw the vicious brutality of the rebels. Death, endless death. Eventually, the visions began to change. After seeing countless almighty experts from the paragon immortal realm give up their lives for the sake of family and homeland, they saw Paragon 9 seals create the precious treasure that was the mountain and sea realm. He knew that he would die in the process, but he didn't care. To stop the war, to protect his home, he created the mountain and sea realm. He took the broken remnants of his people and placed them into the mountain and sea realm. There, they multiplied and became many, and eventually life once again thrived. Gradually, a new immortal world came to be. However, the war was not over. Everyone was trembling, even Meng Hao. He already knew about all of these matters, but he had never seen the visions. However, his eyes were bloodshot, not because of the rage and hatred of his ancestors, but rather because he did not wish and was not willing to allow his own people to wade through the same sea of blood he was seeing in the visions. Eventually, the voice of the mountain and sea realm once again echoed out, seemingly sighing, seemingly reminiscent, and yet filled with obsession and towering hatred. Most of the 3,000 lower realms were destroyed. In the end, only 33 remained. They sealed the mountain and sea realm, and they are the 33 heavens which hang over all our heads. On this day, the Lord of the 7th mountain and sea has rebelled, as has the Lord of the 6th mountain and sea. After the passage of countless years, that most ancient of wars is starting again. And it will be a war of complete extermination. As the voice rang out into the minds of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, the visions changed once again. This time, they saw the battles which had been fought recently in the 8th and 5th mountains and seas. They saw cultivators of the mountain and sea realm killing each other, and they saw the rebellion of the mountain and sea lords. When the cultivators from the other mountains and seas saw this, their eyes were shot with blood. As for the cultivators from the 8th, 7th, 6th, and 5th mountains and seas, their minds felt as if they were being struck by lightning. All of the cultivators on the various battlefields were struck mute. They began to shake, and their eyes filled with grief. All of them felt like screaming from the bottoms of their hearts. Wrong, we were wrong. There should never have been any mountain and sea wars. Even if their own mountain and sea lord rebelled, they would not. They were cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, and they all carried the blood of their ancestors. Their enemies were not the people of the mountain and sea realm, but rather the 33 heavens. One cultivator after another began to cough up blood, and many even shed bloody tears. The cultivators from the other mountains and seas were filled with bitterness and couldn't even speak. Everyone was unprecedentedly quiet. As of this moment, the visions, coupled with the somehow familiar feeling rising up in their blood, caused the hatred for the 33 heavens which existed in their souls to become incomparably clear. Finally, at long last, they understood everything. I am only a spirit automaton. The decisions about whether or not to fight and when exactly to fight are not mine to make. Therefore, I hereby request that all cultivators of the mountain and sea realm tell me what you wish to do. Do we fight now? We are not ready, but then again, neither are our enemies. Or, do we wait? Years from now, both sides will be prepared and then we can fight. All of you, tell me your wish. After the will of the mountain and sea realm finished speaking, it went completely silent. The entire mountain and sea realm was quiet. Everyone stood there silently, thinking, contemplating whether or not to fight. If they fought, they would have the advantage. If they did not fight, they could spend more time preparing. The right to decide did not lie with the will of the mountain and sea realm, nor with the 33 heavens. Instead, it lay with the people of the mountain and sea realm itself. The silence caused the people of the first heaven up above to suddenly grow very nervous. Even the outsider in the golden armor felt his heart pounding. He could never possibly have imagined that forcing the mountain and sea realm's hand in this way would have such a result. Based on his understanding of the people of the mountain and sea realm, he had been convinced that they would choose to wait and prepare. But now, he wasn't sure. Damn it, he growled, his heart racing. The 33 heavens were in no way prepared, which was in fact one of the main reasons why they had incited internal friction by means of the 6th and 7th mountains and seas. They wanted the mountain and sea realm to be in chaos. Then, they could spend years preparing, and by the time the two mysterious forces backing them arrived to wage war, they would fight alongside them in an ultimate and final battle. However, even as the golden-armored outsider stood there, shaking inwardly, a voice suddenly rang out in the mountain and sea realm. Fight! That voice crackled like thunder, ringing out from within the 4th mountain and sea to fill the starry sky. It was only one word, but it then gave rise to a chorus of responses from that same mountain and sea. That voice belonged to none other than the Lord of the 4th mountain and sea, Xianxia. It was one word, one completely domineering word, filled with ultimate decisiveness. An explosion of voices filled the 4th mountain and sea, joining Xianxia's voice. The 4th mountain and sea was going wild, and the cultivators there began to roar at the top of their lungs. Fight! Fight! Next, the lord of the fifth mountain and sea threw his head back and roared. Fight! After that, people began to cry out in the third mountain and sea and the second mountain and sea. Killing intent exploded out, shaking the starry sky. Fight! Next, an ancient voice suddenly echoed out from within the first mountain and sea. Fight! The entire starry sky, the entire mountain and sea realm, was aboil. Countless voices joined together from all parts of the realm. As they echoed about boundlessly, they were joined by a voice from the ninth mountain and sea, which belonged to none other than Jade. Fight! As the mountain and sea realm shook, Meng Hao's grandfather, the lord of the eighth mountain and sea, who sat atop the eighth mountain, fully opened his eyes. When he did, power exploded out that shook the starry sky and caused the heavens to tremble. Shining light like the stars emanated out from his eyes as he slowly rose to his feet. Then, his voice booming like thunder, he spoke a single word. Fight! Chapter 13-14, Fight. /expand. Win or lose, we'll fight. Since they're not ready either, we have to strike now. It's just war, isn't it? Even though we don't know how long it will last, it'll happen eventually anyway. We might as well get on with it. Numerous shouting voices rose up from all parts of the mountain and sea realm. As they echoed out, Meng Hao remained silent, and yet his eyes flickered with an intense desire to do battle. Perhaps after some preparation I could focus even more of the mountain and sea realm's power, he thought. However, by that time, the two other terrifying enemies will have arrived. Since that's the case, why not fight now? If we can wipe out the 33 heavens before the other two forces arrive, perhaps victory won't be an impossibility. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. Now was not the time for silent contemplation. He looked up into the starry sky at the golden armored hand which was still holding Lord White. He did not cry out that he wanted to fight, but instead sent his divine sense roaring out, bursting with power equivalent to 80% of that of a paragon. If the war was starting, then Lord White could be of significant aid to Meng Hao's eternal stratum. Therefore, he could not be allowed to escape. Meng Hao's divine sense rumbled toward him. The golden-armored outsider from the first heaven had an expression of shock on his face. The reaction of all the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm caused him to subconsciously fall back, simultaneously trying to drag Lord White out of the mountain and sea realm. However, it was in that same moment that Meng Hao's divine sense closed in. Meng Hao's divine sense transformed into an enormous blade capable of sundering the heavens, which then slashed viciously at the arm, moving at incredible speed. You're like a grain of rice fighting back against the sun and moon, the golden-armored outsider said with a cold snort. Dazzling golden light then began to shine off of his hand, as if he was simply going to ignore Meng Hao's divine sense and would continue to extract Lord White. However, even as his words echoed out, Meng Hao's blade of divine sense smashed into the golden light, which instantly distorted, and then began to tremble, apparently on the verge of shattering. That's, the golden-armored outsider shouted in alarmed disbelief. His eyes had gone wide and his mind was reeling. Meng Hao's divine sense blade pierced the golden light and then made contact with golden-armored outsider's enormous arm. Cracking sounds echoed out as the golden armor shattered, revealing a long-scaled arm. The arm trembled as Meng Hao's divine sense blade bit into it. The arm was apparently not even qualified to resist. In the blink of an eye, it was completely severed. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with killing intent as he stared at the severed arm and then shouted out in a thunder-like voice, "All invading outsiders shall die." A massive roar echoed back in response from the first heaven. The golden-armored outsider's eyes went wide as the pain from his severed arm exploded out in his body. His heart began to thump as he realized that Meng Hao had accomplished this using only his divine sense. Such a level of power left him completely terrified. "Paragon," shouted the golden-armored outsider. "That's the power of a paragon. Why, you're a paragon." The other outsider cultivators from the first heaven all gasped, and their faces flickered. Back in the mountain and sea realm, the severed arm's hand slowly loosened its grip on Lord White, who turned to face Meng Hao with complete shock and despair on his face. "All who betray the mountain and sea realm shall die." Meng Hao hefted demon weapon Lone Tomb, then blasted toward Lord White as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, the spear stabbed into Lord White's forehead. A miserable scream echoed out, and complete disbelief could be seen in Lord White's eyes. He stared blankly at Meng Hao for a moment before his head completely exploded, followed by his entire body. The Lord of the Seventh Mountain and Sea was dead. As Lord White died, the crown that he had worn began to fall. Cracking sounds could be heard as it then shattered into innumerable pieces. Simultaneously, Lord White's palace on the seventh mountain was transformed into ash, as if it had been crushed by an enormous hand. The only thing that was left behind there in the starry sky was a solitary crown, which floated down to rest atop the seventh mountain. There it waited, for a new lord of the seventh mountain and sea to appear. In the celestial pond atop the seventh mountain, the Xianxia turtle's eyes glowed with a white light. Apparently, the connection that had sealed it to the lord of the seventh mountain and sea was now gone. Boundless power of the mountains and seas began to spread out from the crown, filling the seventh mountain and sea. At the same time, all of the cultivators who had been born in the seventh mountain and sea could feel that power and also could tell that. Now that the Lord had lost his position, everything under heaven was up for grabs. Meanwhile, back in the eighth mountain and sea, in the moment that Lord White died, his corpse transformed into vast quantities of qi and blood, some of which was then absorbed by demon weapon Lolnatum. However, most of that power actually transformed into strands of white mist, which Meng Hao then absorbed through his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Furthermore, in the spot where Lord White had died, a green leaf appeared which began to emanate resplendent light as if a magical technique were forming. In that same moment, Meng Hao's eternal stratum began to operate at full power, pulling the leaf toward him. A moment later, he completely absorbed it. Meng Hao's entire body trembled, and he felt a boundless life force erupting out within him. Although his fleshly body didn't experience a breakthrough, the sudden buildup of energy left him shocked. He had the intense premonition that, if he used God blood to achieve a fleshly body breakthrough, then the power of his fleshly body would exceed that of a Tao Lord, and step directly into the Tao sovereign level. In fact, he could also tell that his sixth soul lamp was apparently on the verge of being extinguished. Even as Meng Hao cut down Lord White, the shocking sounds of battle began to rise up in the mountain and sea realm. Meng Hao could also sense the fluctuations of a towering power rising up from the eighth mountain. As of that moment, Meng Hao knew that his grandpa Meng had finally awoken. At long last, the will of the mountain and sea realm once again spoke. Fight. It was a single word, but the instant that it rang out, the 9 Xianxia turtles on the 9 mountains all threw their heads back and roared. Next, both the sun and moon of the mountain and sea realm blazed with intense, dazzling light. Shocking rumbling sounds echoed out as 9 beams of light shot up from the 9 mountains, then slammed into the golden net up above. The net instantly began to shake and then started to collapse. As the net collapsed, the first heaven of the 33 heavens, regardless of whether or not it wished to, began to descend. Now, what could be seen beyond the starry sky was not a boundless expanse, but rather an enormous landmass. The 33 heavens shook as countless streams of powerful divine sense exploded out. Shocking ripples also emanated out from the first heaven as a cold, ancient voice rang out. War, since the mountain and sea realm desires this war to come early, well then, we shall fight. As the voice echoed out, countless roaring sounds rose up from within the first heaven. Next, figures could be seen emerging from the second heaven, the third heaven, from all of the 33 heavens. More people wished to join in the battle. However, even as that happened, the sun and moon of the mountain and sea realm sent 2 beams of radiant light shooting up into the 33 heavens, toward the spot where the first heaven and the second heaven connected. Rumble! The 2 beams of light instantly pierced through that connection, apparently cutting the first heaven off from the other 33 heavens. Immediately afterwards, another huge net appeared, completely enveloping the first heaven and separating it. The other figures descended from beyond the first heaven were temporarily halted in place. Enraged roars could be heard, and the 33 heavens began to shake as the voices of countless cultivators echoed out. Back in the first heaven, all of the outsiders maintained their silence. However, it didn't take very long before they began to fly off of the land mass and charge toward the mountain and sea realm. The war was really beginning. The battlefield was not one location within the mountain and sea realm, but rather the entire realm. The outsider cultivators from the boundless first heaven scattered out in various directions. These outsiders from the first heaven were vicious in appearance and looked nothing like ordinary cultivators. They looked more like beasts, beasts which radiated shocking, murderous intent. At the same time, all of the lands in the mountain and sea realm were springing into action. Soon, the fighting had already broken out in full force. The seventh mountain and sea was almost instantly transformed into a sea of flames. few cultivators had been left behind there, ensuring that the outsiders from the first heaven met little resistance. Instead, most of them focused on fortifying the area to serve as their base. Clearly, the first heaven had been preparing for this invasion for years. A similar scene was also playing out in the sixth mountain and sea. The fighting immediately intensified. However, there had already been wars playing out in both the eighth and fifth mountains. Although the forces present in those wars had sustained casualties, each front currently contained the combined power of two mountains and seas. Furthermore, because of what Meng Hao had done in the eighth mountain and sea, the fighting there had not been as intense, and thus the armies there were still relatively intact. Now that the true war was beginning, all of the cultivators there fought back enthusiastically, and the booming sounds of battle echoed out. As for the other mountains and seas, there had been no fighting going on. The only thing they lacked was time to organize themselves. However, the outsiders from the first heaven were equally unprepared, so chaotic fighting immediately broke out. In the first mountain and sea, the echelon cultivator Dao Heaven took the lead in the fighting, and as for all the other sects and clans there, they had no other choice than to join in. It was the same in the second mountain and sea and the third mountain and sea. The only exception was the fourth mountain and sea. Chapter 13:15, Lord White falls, the battle commences. Chapter 13:16, Outsider Paragon. The fourth mountain and sea had been preparing for a very, very long time. Perhaps it would even be appropriate to say that they were always in a state of preparation. Almost as soon as the outsiders arrived, the starry sky of the fourth mountain and sea began to rumble. Numerous buildings appeared, which seemed to be Yama King palaces from the underworld. In addition, a boiling yellow springs appeared, sweeping across the heavens. Before the outsiders could even start fighting, miserable screams rang out as heavy casualties were inflicted. They couldn't even set foot into the fourth mountain and sea. Countless enraged cultivators charged out from the fourth mountain and sea, roaring in rage. Die. Most unusual of all, however, was not the fourth mountain and sea, but rather the ninth mountain and sea. Almost in the same instant that the outsiders arrived there, a beam of dazzling light shot out from some unknown region, sweeping out to cover that entire mountain and sea. It completely passed over the cultivators, but as for the outsiders, they were instantly shredded to pieces. The war between the mountain and sea realm and the 33 heavens had now fully erupted. At the same time, the will of the mountain and sea realm spread out to cover the whole realm, crushing down onto the outsiders. They roared as cracking sounds emanated out. In that moment, their fleshly bodies, their cultivation bases, everything about them was suppressed. Almost instantly, their battle prowess was reduced to 60%. That was one terrifying aspect of the mountain and sea realm. It wasn't just a place for the immortal world to gradually recover. After all, it had been created during a time of war, and therefore, everything about it was designed to be used in warfare. Mountain and sea realm. An enraged roar could be heard coming from the first heaven as an emaciated figure appeared, whose every step caused the mountain and sea realm shake. The aura of a paragon emanated out from his body, spreading out in all directions to shake everything. Apparently, the pressure coming from the will of the mountain and sea realm had little effect on this figure. When he first appeared, he was very skinny, but as he neared, he grew larger. In the blink of an eye, he was 300 meters long, then 3,000 meters, and soon he was fully 30,000 meters tall. He bore the appearance of some fiendish beast, covered with scales, with a long tail stretching out behind it. He even had a horn sticking out of his head, which radiated a spectacular energy. Furthermore, black flames flickered around him, and his eyes were bright red. Everywhere he looked, the starry sky twisted and distorted. With a single glance, he surveyed all the living beings beneath him, and with the exception of the one entity he actually feared in the mountain and sea realm, his gaze only momentarily lingered on two others. One of those entities was in the fourth mountain and sea, while the other was in the eighth mountain and sea. One was K. Siddhigarbha and the other was Meng Hao. The reason he took K. Siddhigarbha so seriously was because of how his energy surged so mightily there within the fourth mountain and sea. His glory bordered on that of a paragon, and was enough to shake the highest heavens, to spread shock throughout the mountains and seas. The reason he took Meng Hao seriously was because of how he had just slaughtered Lord White. After all, Lord White was an outsider from the first heaven, one of this beast's people. Trifling mountain and sea realm, said the enormous 30,000-meter creature. The forces of the first heaven, where my people reside, are enough to wipe you all out by themselves. The time has come, my generals. Imperial Lord Mendillo, exalted devils, the time has come for a sacrifice of blood. Sacrifice the blood of the immortals of the mountain and sea realm to the heavens, and offer up their ghosts. Take all life in this place, and transform it into ash. His voice echoed out to fill the entire mountain and sea realm. In response to his words, countless outsiders flooded out from the first heaven behind him, radiating killing intent as they spread out into the mountain and sea realm. Whether it was in terms of cultivation base or ability to slaughter, this second wave of outsiders far exceeded the first. They were clearly the elite and most powerful fighters. Booms rang out in all directions, shaking the mountains and seas as even more fierce fighting erupted. Furthermore, there were three figures which slowly emerged, three outsiders. It was impossible to tell if they were male or female, as they were completely covered in scales. Their eyes glowed red as if with fire, and the leader among the three was fully 3,000 meters tall, and surrounded by flames as well as shocking fluctuations that could be second only to that of a paragon. He was an imperial lord, a quasi-paragon. Behind the quasi-paragon were two other outsiders, also with glowing red eyes and cruel grins. Their cultivation bases also shook heaven and earth. They were clearly equipped with the power of 6 essences. One of them wore golden armor, except that the armor on one of its arms was completely destroyed. This was the outsider who had attempted to take Lord White away. As soon as he appeared, his eyes locked onto Meng Hao in the 8th mountain and sea, and they flickered with killing intent. These two were not paragons, nor were they imperial lords. However, with 6 essences, they stood at the pinnacle of power, and any one of them could unleash a complete catastrophe onto any battlefield. The first heaven of the 33 heavens was the first land which sealed the mountain and sea realm. For tens upon tens of thousands of years, it had served as the first barrier that prevented cultivators from the mountain and sea realm from escaping, and therefore, it was no surprise that it housed powerful beings like this. The hearts of tens upon tens of thousands of cultivators in the 9 mountains and seas were completely shaken. Everyone looked up into the starry sky to see the paragon up above in the first heaven. His aura was terrifying to an indescribable level as it spread out through the mountain and sea realm. His energy could shake heaven and earth, as if a single thought on his part could eradicate any living creature he laid eyes upon. Such powerful divine sense caused even Tao realm experts to tremble as if they were facing something completely without equal. Paragon. That's the power of a paragon. The 33 heavens, just how many paragons do they have? Even the mountain and sea lords were shaken. Despite the blessing of power from the mountains and seas, everyone was still so shocked that they almost lost their will to fight. The 30,000-meter-long outsider paragon suddenly extended his right hand and then shoved it out toward the mountain and sea realm. Instantly, the starry sky filled with rumbling sounds and began to peel and shatter. Paragon power erupted out, surging toward the 4th and 8th mountains. Shockingly, he was first sending out his divine sense to try to eradicate his 2 greatest threats. Remember that thou hast been exterminated by Egu. That is my true name, which endures unchanging no matter how many tens of thousands of years has passed. As the outsider paragon's hand descended, heaven and earth shook violently. The mountain and sea realm trembled, and its cultivators could sense a shocking pressure emanating down from the starry sky, a pressure which easily shoved aside the power of the mountains and seas, and then shot directly toward Meng Hao. Contained within that pressure was a will of extermination that clearly intended to shred him into pieces, to destroy him in body and spirit. Meng Hao's pupils constricted as an intense sensation of deadly crisis welled up within him. That sensation of crisis sent his cultivation base aflame, and he knew that if he could not ward off this paragon's attack, then he would be killed beyond the shadow of a doubt. Thankfully, Paragon Egu's power was not focused completely on attacking Meng Hao. Instead, it was split into 2 parts, one of which was focused on destroying Meng Hao, the other of which was speeding down toward the 4th mountain and sea, toward a spot deep within the countless Yama King palaces, toward a patch of pitch-black dirt in the underworld, where an enormous 3,000-meter-tall statue sat there cross-legged. That statue was none other than the lord of the 4th mountain and sea, K. Siddhigarbha. He was the most powerful of the mountain and sea lords, and also the most powerful person in the mountain and sea realm under the level of Paragon. Innumerable souls perpetually flew around the statue. After all, the 4th mountain controlled the underworld of the entire mountain and sea realm, and therefore, The Lord of the Fourth Mountain and Sea was also the mountain and sea realm's Lord of the Underworld. Even as the crushing power of the outsider paragon closed in, the statue's seemingly eternally closed eyes suddenly snapped open. Cracking sounds could be heard, and fissures spread out all over the surface of the statue as it slowly raised its right hand, then viciously jabbed out with its finger. Are you mmmmblllly? Massive rumbling sounds echoed out as Ksidigarbha's body collapsed layer by layer. As it shattered and dissipated, the pressure from the outsider paragon suddenly lurched to a halt, incapable of proceeding. The statue dissipated, and Ksidigarbha's true form was revealed. He was an ancient old man, tall and clad in a long yellow robe. As he stood there, a shocking energy pulsed out of him, and he raised his right hand to perform an incantation gesture. Instantly, the fourth mountain and sea began to tremble, and the sound of chanting scriptures began to emanate out from the yellow springs up above in the starry sky and the countless Yama King palaces. Simultaneously, Joss flame power began to converge upon Ksidigarbha. A boom echoed out as the outsider paragon's pressure was crushed by Ksidigarbha's finger jab. At the same time, Ksidigarbha's face paled a bit, although it quickly recovered. Then, his eyes began to shine with a strange light as he suddenly looked up, and then raised his right hand into the air. To be struck but not strike back, he said coolly. That is not the Tao of Ksidigarbha. His voice thrummed with a strange cadence, and as the words left his mouth, he pushed his hand up into the air. Immediately, the Yama King palaces and the yellow springs, coupled with the boundless Joss flame power, rumbled up, transforming into an enormous hand which shot up into the starry sky toward the outsider paragon, as if to grab him. It didn't matter that he had a powerful cultivation base, or that he was a paragon. Since he struck out at Ksidigarbha, how could Ksidigarbha not strike back? He would answer with his own attack, for the time had come to draw swords. The outsider paragon's eyes widened as he looked down at the fourth mountain. He himself wields the power of a Tao sovereign, but by converging tens of thousands of years of Joss flame, he can actually unleash the might of an imperial lord. Even as the outsider paragon was reeling in shock, back in the eighth mountain and sea, the paragon's might was still bearing down on Meng Hao. Eyes shining brightly, Meng Hao raised both hands wide into the air, summoning the paragon bridge. His divine sense also exploded out with 80% of the power of a paragon. Heaven shaking, earth-shattering power slammed into the paragon's pressure, fighting back against it. When they slammed into each other, a massive boom rang out like a clap of thunder. The starry sky trembled, even darkening because of the blinding light of the paragon bridge. At the same time, numerous figures could be seen walking across the bridge, from whom terrifying auras could be sensed. The outsider paragon was completely and utterly shocked. He had to admit that he had underestimated the mountain and sea realm. He had originally anticipated being able to eradicate both opponents at the same time, only to find that one was more shocking than the other. Chapter 13:17, Killing Intent of a Paragon. The sudden appearance of the Paragon Bridge completely shocked the outsider paragon. In fact, he recognized it. Back when the Great Catastrophe occurred, he had not been at the Paragon level, and thus did not play a large role in what happened. However, he had seen this very bridge before, when it was crushed by an attack by the all-powerful Nine Seals and his mountain and sea realm. Even thinking about that bitter war left him trembling. Although Nine Seals had long since been destroyed in body and spirit, when this outsider paragon thought about him, he was left shaken. He didn't understand it back in those days, but later came to the realization that if Nine Seals had felt like abandoning the Paragon immortal realm, no one could have prevented him from leaving. In fact, the two terrifying forces who fought in the war years ago would not have been capable of such a feat, not without unleashing their ancestral souls. However, the price to be paid for such an act was so high that even those two powers would be hard-pressed to bear the costs. 1. The ancestral soul is something that comes up in both Beseech the Devil and Renegade Immortal, mostly toward the latter parts of both stories. It was with mixed feelings that Igu looked at the Paragon Bridge and the figures on it. Those figures were shocking, but what was even more astonishing to him was the power of Meng Hao's divine sense. However, even the fact that Meng Hao's divine sense was 80% as powerful as his own didn't cause his mind to reel. What caused him to begin trembling, what caused his eyes to suddenly widen, was that he had just sensed something within Meng Hao's divine sense. He had sensed familiar fluctuations. Those fluctuations left his heart pounding and his mind spinning. Nine Seals. Those are the fluctuations of Nine Seals. This man. Is Nine Seal's successor. Igu felt as if infinite lightning bolts were slamming into his mind. He raised his hand, sending Paragon power to blast away the gigantic hand summoned by Xianxia. Then, killing intent flickered within his eyes as he turned his attention to the eighth mountain and sea. There was no way that he would permit another Paragon Nine Seals to appear. Nine Essences Paragons like that were vastly removed from his own level as a Seven Essences Paragon. Although both were called Paragons, the difference between them was even more dramatic than the difference between 4 Essences Dao Sovereigns and 6 Essences Dao Sovereigns. This kid must die. If I don't kill him, then the possibility exists that he will become the second Nine Seals. He could potentially exterminate all of the 33 heavens. The outsider Paragon's mind was spinning as he extended his hand and made a vicious pinching gesture toward the eighth mountain and sea. The power of his cultivation base exploded out, the full might of his Paragon power. The eighth mountain and sea trembled, and all the cultivators there, including the outsiders, began to bleed from their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths, as they felt intense pressure weighing down on them. Apparently, this outsider Paragon was even willing to sacrifice the lives of his own people in order to wipe out Meng Hao. He was attempting to crush the starry sky of the eighth mountain and sea, and all living things therein. However, it was at this point that a beam of white light shot out from within the ninth mountain and sea. It split the starry sky like a white waterfall as it rose up, whistling through the air toward the 30,000-meter-tall outsider. When it reached his hand, it exploded, instantly sending the outsider Paragon's hand rebounding backward. "I've been waiting for you." The voice belonged to that of a woman, and it was as cold as ice. It was none other than Paragon Sea Dream. Outsider Paragon Igu looked up, and his eyes swirled with killing intent. "Sea Dream, you've managed to stay alive by means of a secret magic all these years, but your essences have been destroyed. Your cultivation base is like nothing compared to back then. If you force yourself to fight, it will only hasten your death. If you had avoided resisting us, then I would have let you be. After all, the destruction of the mountain and sea realm has nothing to do with you, and yet you still dare attack me." Paragon Sea Dream appeared off in the distance, slowly striding forward. Her voice cold, she said, "Back when I achieved my Tao, you were nothing more than an ant. Later, when I was a Tao sovereign, I encountered you, dying, whereupon you dropped to your knees and pleaded with me to prevent you from getting sucked into the cycle of reincarnation. After I became a paragon, you didn't hesitate to run your clan into the ground, also that you could acquire a celestial emperor flower. Why? To fawn on me in the hopes that I would give you the magic you needed to break through to the Tao Lord level. And now you, a member of the Drakeworm tribe, dare to bare your fangs in front of me." The outsider Paragon's face flickered in response to Sea Dream's coolly spoken words. Every sentence that came out of her mouth seemed to dredge up bad memories in the outsider, causing the killing intent in his eyes to intensify. "If you want to die," Igu said, "then I'll fulfill your desire." The outsider Paragon knew that, thanks to Sea Dream's interference, killing Meng Hao was now an impossibility. Furthermore, despite the words of contempt he had spoken towards Sea Dream, he still feared her. After all, when he was still just a child, Paragon Sea Dream had been one of the paragons of the Paragon Immortal Realm. She had an incredible standing, and could unleash shocking magical abilities so far above his own as to be utterly incomparable. Rumbling could be heard as the outsider Paragon attacked, and he and Paragon Sea Dream began fighting in the starry sky far up above the mountain and sea realm. Their battle caused the entire world to tremble, the heavens to flash with colors, and the starry sky to grow dim. In almost that same moment, the outsider Imperial Lord's eyes flickered away from Meng Hao and focused onto the fourth mountain. Snorting coldly, he transformed into a beam of light that shot in that same direction. His target was Xianxia, who was able to wield the power of an Imperial Lord. As he neared, Xianxia looked up, and the boundless Joss flame power transformed into a huge vortex, which shot toward the outsider Imperial Lord, instantly enveloping him. Shocking booms rang out as the two of them began to fight. As for the remaining outsider Tao sovereigns, their eyes flickered with brutal gleams. One of them, the one in the golden armor, slowly said, "This kid from the eighth mountain and sea is mine." The other one laughed, then closed his eyes, whereupon his body twisted and distorted, becoming 5 separate streams of green smoke that shot in 5 different directions through the void. The destinations of those streams of smoke: the first, second, third, eighth, and ninth mountains. Their targets were not ordinary cultivators, but rather the mountain and sea lords of those very mountains. Shockingly, He was using his own power to simultaneously fight against 5 mountain and sea lords. Rumbling sounds echoed out from those 5 mountains, as powerful magical techniques suddenly exploded into being. The golden-armored outsider Dao Sovereign was the one who had already clashed with Meng Hao just moments ago. He licked his lips, and killing intent swirled in his eyes as they locked onto Meng Hao's position within the 8th mountain and sea. He wasn't sure why his own exalted paragon leader specifically wanted Meng Hao dead, but he didn't care. Considering that his cultivation base was at the Dao Sovereign level, cutting down someone at the 5 essences level, even if they were at the peak, would not be very difficult. The thing he cared about the most was that Meng Hao had killed his junior tribesman Lord White, someone who had made heroic contributions to the First Heaven. Because of all Lord White's services, the tribe had already arranged for his bloodline to be awakened upon his return, which would enable him to rise to the level of a true Dao sovereign. They had even made preparations to appoint him as a tribe elder. But before that could happen, he had been cut down right in front of the golden-armored outsider. This outsider wanted nothing more than to kill Meng Hao, and that desire was growing stronger. The only thing he needed to be mindful of was Meng Hao's terrifying divine sense, but by this time, he had already taken precautions against it. Grinning, he strode forward, then slashed out at the starry sky, which shattered apart as he bore down on the 8th mountain and sea, bursting with killing intent. "So how do you want to die, kid? I'll let you decide." Sinister laughter rang out as the outsider Dao Sovereign picked up speed. From a distance, he looked like a golden shooting star, piercing through the starry sky in Meng Hao's direction. A strange light appeared in Meng Hao's eyes. His blood was already pumping. His cultivation base erupted as he strode forward. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. In the blink of an eye, the outsider Dao Sovereign was upon him, but by that time he had already taken 7 steps. When the 7th step landed, his energy spiked, increasing exponentially. At the same time, his divine sense shot out, and the Paragon Bridge rumbled down. Then, demon weapon Lonlatum suddenly appeared in his right hand. The power of Meng Hao's fleshly body converged on the spear, along with energy from his cultivation base and magical techniques. That rumbling power seemed to freeze the starry sky, and the killing intent became completely focused. "Not bad," the outsider Dao Sovereign said, pupils constricting. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and roared, sending out monstrous sound waves. Astonishingly, the image of a giant appeared behind the outsider Dao Sovereign. The power of 6 essences also erupted out, forming a tempest. At the same time, a statue appeared in his hands. That statue depicted a lizard, and as soon as it appeared, a strange aura erupted out which began to suppress Meng Hao's divine sense. It took only a moment for his divine sense to drop from 80% of the power of a paragon to half of that. Then, the windstorm began to fight back against the power of Meng Hao's spear. RUMMMBLLLE. Massive sounds tore at the starry sky. After extinguishing 5 soul lamps, Meng Hao could unleash incredible power that was only a hair away from the 6 essences level. However, when facing a true 6 essences cultivator, that simply wasn't enough. As his divine sense was suppressed, the feeling of deadly crisis in his heart grew more intense. The Paragon Bridge collapsed, and demon weapon Lonlatum recoiled backward. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as the backlash hit his cultivation base, scattering it. His fleshly body was slashed viciously, sending blood and gore flying about. The essence tempest surrounding the outsider Dao Sovereign weakened a bit. Although he had been capable of suppressing Meng Hao's attack just now, he had been forced to go all out to do so. That was especially because of the bizarre demon weapon Lonlatum, which caused him to frown. He took a step forward, flickering to appear in front of the seriously wounded Meng Hao. Eyes glittering with a cruel light, he didn't attempt to kill him, but instead opened his mouth wide and lunged toward Meng Hao's head. "I'll eat you and absorb your power." Bizarre light shone in the eyes of the golden-armored outsider. However, in the same moment that his jaws were about to latch onto Meng Hao's eyes suddenly flickered. Although his injuries had seemed severe, the combination of the Eternal Stratum and the Green Emperor's eternal incantation transformed into something like an undying, unkillable secret magic. He recovered almost instantly. Then he clenched his hand into a fist and began to punch the outsider Dao Sovereign. Life Extermination Fist. Bedevilment Fist. God-slaying Fist. BOOMMM. Those 3 fist strikes slammed into the outsider Dao Sovereign, who had never expected that Meng Hao would have a secret magic that would enable him to recover so quickly. His eyes went wide, but he was too slow to avoid Meng Hao's successive blows. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he was sent tumbling back. Enraged, he was just about to counterattack, but unfortunately he was not familiar with Meng Hao's fighting style. Once Meng Hao won the initiative, he never let go. Chapter 13:18. Battling a Dao Sovereign. It didn't matter who Meng Hao was fighting. Once he seized the initiative, that opponent would definitely have to pay a heavy price. It was the same with Lord White, and with all of the people Meng Hao had fought before. People who knew a bit about him would be aware of this, and would do everything they could to avoid losing the initiative. Not even once. Even in the moment that the golden-armored outsider Dao Sovereign's rage flared, and he prepared to counterattack, Meng Hao's eyes gleamed brightly, and he waved his finger, unleashing the 8th demon sealing hex. Although using this hexing magic on someone with a cultivation base far higher than his own would lead to a powerful backlash, Meng Hao ignored the blood that oozed out of the corners of his mouth and unleashed it anyway. Immediately, the golden-armored outsider Dao Sovereign lurched to a halt in midair, face flickering. Then Meng Hao's energy ignited, and the copper mirror flickered out, transforming into the battle weapon, which Meng Hao slashed down viciously. As the rumbling sounds echoed out, the outsider Dao Sovereign felt a sensation of intense crisis explode up inside of him. He could sense that even though he was a Dao Sovereign, he was still only an inch away from death. He had been prepared for Meng Hao's divine sense, and had quickly suppressed it. However, he had never imagined that Meng Hao's proficiencies would include things other than divine sense. The current attack which was being leveled against him seemed as shocking as a lightning bolt from the heavens. "Damn it!" howled the golden-armored outsider Dao Sovereign, ignoring whatever injuries might result, ignoring the pain of the organs inside his body being crushed and his chi passageways shattering. He burst out with power to lunge backward by 3 meters. The glittering glow of a blade then passed right by him. Meanwhile, on top of the 8th mountain, another shocking battle was beginning. An illusory figure shot past the celestial pond, and as it did, it glanced down at the Xuanwu turtle, grinned coldly, and waved a hand. Instantly, the Xuanwu turtle's howls shook the entire 8th mountain. The figure's pupils constricted slightly, but it shot past the celestial pond nonetheless, heading directly toward the temple beyond. As it neared, it approached the door and prepared to barge in, and yet, almost immediately, it fell back. In that moment, the door exploded into pieces that spiraled out like countless sharp blades, transforming into an explosive rain that surged toward the illusory figure. Then, a tall man emerged from within the shattered remnants of the temple door. He wore a breathtaking suit of armor, and as soon as he emerged, he unleashed a fist strike that could shake heaven and earth. The void in the area suddenly solidified, forcing that illusory figure to actually appear in person. It was none other than the outsider Dao Sovereign who had split himself into 5 incarnations. The person who had forced him to appear was, of course, none other than Meng Hao's grandfather, the Lord of the 8th Mountain and Sea. "So it turns out you really were telling the truth, senior outsider," murmured Grandpa Meng, clearly speaking only to himself. "I awoke from slumber on the very day my grandson rose to prominence, the same day that the starry sky shattered and the first heaven descended. It looks like he planned this entire situation all along, or perhaps the Fang and Meng clans are just one piece of the bigger picture." When he looked up at the outsider, his eyes flickered with killing intent, and he began to run forward. "What armor is that?" the outsider said, face falling. "Damn it, that armor. What is it with that armor?" He once again backed up in retreat, but he wasn't as fast as Grandpa Meng. The Lord of the 8th Mountain and Sea shot forward and unleashed a punch. A boom rang out as the outsider tumbled away like a kite with its string cut, blood spraying out of his mouth. He flew back for 5,000 kilometers before finally grinding to a halt, his face flickering with shock as Grandpa Meng once again appeared directly in front of him. "Damn it, you think I'm afraid of you or something?" The outsider Dao Sovereign growled through clenched teeth. Suddenly, he began to grow. In the blink of an eye, he was 300 meters tall, with a long tail that shattered the starry sky as it whipped toward the Lord of the 8th Mountain and Sea. Similar battles began to play out on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 9th mountains. Compared to the battles being fought on the first 3 of those mountains, the one on the 9th mountain was especially strange. The outsider's clone was simply hovering above the mountain, not moving. In front of him floated a huge eye, and the 2 of them were staring at each other as they fought a battle of divine will. Furthermore, it appeared as if the Lord of the 9th Mountain and Sea, Jai Tian, was actually attempting to possess the outsider Dao Sovereign's clone. At the same time, countless battles had broken out within the 9 mountains and seas. The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were fighting back savagely against the outsiders. Virtually, all of the Dao realm fighters had appeared, and massive booms filled the entire mountain and sea realm. Almost the entire realm was a battlefield now. The will of the mountain and sea realm continued to bolster the people with power, simultaneously maintaining the barrier that separated the other 32 heavens from the first heaven. The first heaven was now trapped, unable to receive any aid from the other outsiders. It was also continuing to maintain the pressure that pervaded the mountain and sea realm, ensuring that any outsider below a Six Essences Dao sovereign was significantly weakened. The battle raged, causing both roars and screams to echo out into the vast expanse. Back in the 8th mountain and sea, Meng Hao's battle weapon glittered like the sun and moon as it slashed toward the golden-armored outsider Dao sovereign. Blood sprayed out of the outsider's mouth as the armor covering his chest shattered, and a huge wound appeared. A will of extermination poured into him, provoking an enraged roar. However, fear welled up in his heart. If he hadn't paid an extreme price to avoid the attack just now, thus losing the initiative, he would definitely have been killed. Meng Hao frowned, then waved his hand, causing numerous mountains to appear. A rift was torn open in the void, and the blood demon emerged, roaring, and the essence of divine flame converged and shot toward the outsider. However, all of those things were distractions. The true killing blow was coming from Meng Hao's left hand, from which exploded the power of the mountains and seas. He was the future lord of the mountain and sea realm, and at this moment, a sliver of the power of the mountains and seas descended towards him, then transformed into a huge hand which grabbed out toward the outsider Dao sovereign. Meng Hao then transformed into a beam of light, hefting the battle weapon and then unleashing another attack. All of this conformed with Meng Hao's style of fighting, always attack. As the hand formed from the power of the mountains and seas descended upon the outsider Dao sovereign, his eyes widened. Suddenly, all of the scales on his body rose up, and he let out a howl. The scales then shattered, transforming into a windstorm of 6 essences energy which exploded toward the power of the mountains and seas. Booming sounds rang out as the mountain-consuming incantation, the blood demon, and the essence of divine flame all shot forward. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent as he then waved his left finger. The 7th demon sealing hex. Instantly, karma threads appeared atop the golden-armored outsider's head. They rapidly formed together into a sealing mark, which then crushed down onto him. At this point, Meng Hao performed another incantation gesture, unleashing the 6th demon sealing hex. The 6th hex was the life-death hexing, which caused a gray magical symbol to appear on the outsider's forehead. Then the magical symbol exploded, sending blood spraying out of his forehead. At the same time, however, a gleam of ridicule appeared in the outsider's eyes. That look caused Meng Hao's heart to flicker with fear. Simultaneously, the outsider Dao sovereign spoke 2 words in a sinister voice. Self-essence. Almost immediately, the 6 streams of essence power within the tempest merged together into one. A black sea of flames then rumbled out in all directions. The tiny bit of power from the mountain and sea realm faded away within the black sea of flames. The mountains melted, and the image of the blood demon dissipated. Then, the black flames took shape into an enormous creature, something like a lizard, which howled as it charged toward Meng Hao. It was a moment of critical danger. Roaring, Meng Hao viciously attacked the flame lizard with his battle weapon. Meng Hao was like a bug compared to his gigantic opponent. However, his powerful battle weapon instantly slashed down onto its head, slicing it open. A shriek rang out. However, this black flame lizard was formed from the essence of self, and was so powerful that it was only seriously injured and not killed. The black flame lizard roared, ignoring the intense pain it was feeling as it attempted to consume Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and the battle weapon vanished. In its place appeared Demon Weapon Longlatum, which he violently hurled out. Demon Weapon Longlatum transformed into a beam of demonic light which pierced directly into the black flame lizard. The lizard shuddered, staring at Meng Hao for a moment before it suddenly exploded. However, that explosion caused a mountain of black flames to charge toward Meng Hao like 10,000 horses, instantly inundating him. Even as the flames enveloped him, Meng Hao's eyes flashed from the sensation of intense deadly crisis. In that moment, the lightning cauldron suddenly flickered into being above his head. Electricity danced, and he suddenly switched places with a 5 essences outsider not too far off in the distance. That 5 essences outsider appeared exactly where Meng Hao had been, and didn't have time to react before the black sea of flames consumed it. A blood-curdling scream lingered in the air as it was completely destroyed. At the same time, the outsider Dao Sovereign coughed up a mouthful of blood as Meng Hao's 7th and 6th hexes inflicted more damage. "Damn it," he roared in extreme frustration. He was clearly far more powerful than Meng Hao, and yet after losing the initiative, he had suffered setback after setback. Even as he roared, he flickered into motion. The black sea of flames recoiled into itself, once again turning into a lizard, although it was much weaker than last time. The black flame lizard threw its head back and roared, then eyed Meng Hao with a deadly gaze as it charged forward in attack. Meng Hao sighed inwardly, knowing that he had lost the initiative. Without the slightest hesitation, he shot backward, unwilling to tangle any further with this outsider Dao Sovereign. Based on the current level of his cultivation base, turning an extended battle into a victory would be very difficult. Even though his hexing magic could suppress his opponent temporarily, now that he would be expecting it, the hexing magic wouldn't be of much use. The best way to use the hexing magic was in a surprise attack. Furthermore, the backlash for using it against someone so powerful was something he could only endure 1 or 2 times. More than that would leave him seriously injured. As he retreated, the outsider Dao Sovereign threw his head back and let out an enraged roar as he gave chase. He wanted to kill Meng Hao more than he ever had before. Furthermore, the humiliation he felt from having nearly died just now ensured that he would not underestimate Meng Hao. Quite the opposite, in fact. He was now more vigilant than before. By now, magical items were swirling around him which would prevent Meng Hao from using the 8th hex on him. "Think you can just leave?" the outsider Dao Sovereign roared, eyes gleaming with killing intent. As one of the 2 Dao Sovereigns of the First Heaven, he had an incredibly high position. If he couldn't kill Meng Hao, it would be a complete and utter embarrassment. Chapter 13:19. The Reserves of the Mountains and Seas. The battle between the First Heaven and the Mountain and Sea realm was now fully underway. There was no longer a massive field of stars stretching out above the heads of the cultivators of the Mountain and Sea realm. Instead, it had been replaced by an enormous landmass, which was like a roof of black clouds that blanketed everything. In some areas, lightning could even be seen dancing about, and occasional peals of thunder would echo out in all directions. The landmass stretched out to cover the entire Mountain and Sea realm, exerting intense pressure down onto it. Paragons were fighting. In the starry sky that separated the First Heaven and the Mountain and Sea realm, the First Heaven's Paragon was fighting a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering battle of life and death with Paragon Sea Dream. Paragon Sea Dream wanted to take the fight to the First Heaven, whereas the outsider Paragon wanted the shockwaves of their battle to hit the Mountain and Sea realm. The fierce fighting between them shattered the starry sky and caused massive winds to sweep through the void. Daos were shattered and natural laws destroyed. Second only to the Paragon battle was the fighting in the 4th Mountain and Sea, where Xianxia was fighting the outsider Imperial Lord Mendillo. The 4th Mountain and Sea was like a sea of flames as rumbling echoed out between the Yama King palaces and the outsider's black flames. After converging boundless Joss flame, Xianxia was on equal footing with the outsider Imperial Lord. Of the 4 most powerful cultivators from the First Heaven, 2 had already been pinned down. Of the other 2, the Dao Sovereigns, one had split into 5 clones in an attempt to kill the great Mountain and Sea Lords. However, to do that was turning out to be easier said than done, and he had also come to find himself in a tight spot. That left only the golden-armored Dao Sovereign, whose battle with Meng Hao had become one of the pivotal fights in the Mountain and Sea realm. At the same time, other Dao realm experts from the First Heaven were fighting the patriarchs of the various sects and clans of the Mountain and Sea realm. Fierce fighting was unfolding everywhere, and the battlefield stretched without limit. Furthermore, outsider Chosen had also joined the fighting, vicious grins on their faces as they fought, with seemingly no one capable of resisting them. But then the Chosen from the various sects and clans of the Mountain and Sea realm joined the fray to fight back. Massive booms echoed out, and the mountains and seas all shook. In the first Mountain and Sea, Dao realm battles were being fought like everywhere else. At the same time, outsiders and Mountain and Sea cultivators of various cultivation realms were all engaged in bitter combat. On one battlefield was an outsider cultivator in a black robe. His skin was covered in black scales, with one white scale visible on his forehead. He had an ancient realm cultivation base, and yet his battle prowess put him even higher than that. Paragon Immortal Realm. They can't even stand up to a single blow. If we had known this, we wouldn't have needed to rely on all 33 heavens. Our first heaven alone would have been enough to dominate them. And now, the third among the 7 bloodlines of the Drakeworm tribe, the most powerful bloodline from Drakemont, will definitely accumulate the most kills in this battle. No matter where this outsider chosen went on the battlefield, no one was capable of fighting back against him, causing his arrogant sneer to widen. However, it was at this point that a white beam of light shot toward him from off in the distance. "You sure can talk big," shouted a voice from within the beam of light. A cold snort echoed out as a white-robed young man became visible. It was none other than the echelon cultivator from the first mountain, Dao Heaven. As he neared, he unleashed an explosive attack, causing the outsider chosen's face to flicker and then turn very serious. On the second, third, and fourth mountains. In fact, in all of the mountain and sea realm, similar scenes were playing out. In the fourth mountain, the shockwaves blasting out from the battle between Xianxia and the outsider Imperial Lord filled a wide area. However, there were still outsiders pouring in to fight with the cultivators of the fourth mountain. Among the army of cultivators from the fourth mountain and sea was a woman who stood there calmly, surrounded by a host of guards, fellow cultivators tasked with protecting her. She was not spectacularly beautiful, but rather was cold and cheerless. However, starlight sparkled in her eyes as she constantly sent orders out to the forces on all of the fronts of battle in the fourth mountain and sea. She was single-handedly coordinating the entire war effort, drawing upon the power of the fourth mountain and sea to its very limit. This woman who was in charge of all the strategy and tactics was none other than Su Qing. Not only did Xianxia have a profound cultivation base, he was also an amazing teacher. After taking Su Qing in as his apprentice, he had instructed her well, and her cultivation base had advanced by leaps and bounds. Furthermore, she had also revealed unusual talent in strategy and tactics. In the seventh mountain, most of the cultivators had followed the orders of Lord White to invade the eighth mountain and sea. However, some people had chosen not to fight, and among them was the echelon cultivator Yuan Jian. Currently, Yuan Jian was roaring as he fought madly against the outsider chosen, who had invaded the seventh mountain. In the ninth mountain and sea, the Fang clan, the Li clan, and various other great sects and clans had all mobilized and joined the fighting. Sun Hai and Fang Yu, along with all the other famous chosen, were all soaked in blood as they fought fierce battles. As of now, the power of these chosen was the most spectacular thing in the mountain and sea realm, next to those of the Dao realm. Meng Hao's father was the clan chief of the Fang clan, and yet could not leave planet South Heaven. However, the planet's spell formation was in full operation, and any outsiders who dared encroach upon the area were destroyed. The war was not going as badly as many people had predicted it would for the mountain and sea realm. In this explosive early onslaught, things were not going smoothly for the first heaven. The power with which the mountain and sea realm was fighting back left the outsiders completely shocked. However, any optimism was temporary at best. After all, there were 33 heavens, and this was merely the power of the first heaven. Of course, the first heaven was among the more powerful of the various 33 heavens. When you added together all of the paragons in the 33 heavens, there were only 5. Even still, that made the 33 heavens shockingly powerful. Most importantly, although there were only 5 paragons, when it came to Dao realm and ancient realm cultivators, the 33 heavens completely outnumbered the mountain and sea realm by several times, making them far more powerful. However, the reserves available to the mountain and sea realm were not limited to what could be seen at the moment. After all, the will of the mountains and seas, as well as Paragon Sea Dream, had been well aware all along that the war with the 33 heavens was unavoidable. How could they possibly not make advanced preparations? As the fighting broke out, powerful ripples began to spread out from the 3 great Taoist societies of the 9 mountains and seas as they began to build up power. In addition to all of that, among the 33 heavens, there was a realm which was both guarded against and also viewed with importance. The 34th heaven, the windswept realm. After slipping away from the mountain and sea realm and thus being freed from the ceiling and restrictions there, the windswept imperial lord, the same one who had fought Sea Dream years ago, most definitely would have had the chance to become a paragon. Even as all of these other events were playing out, in the first, third, and fifth mountains, there were 3 areas which were somewhat set apart from all of the fighting going on around them. 3 ancient temples floated in the starry sky. Each one of those temples had a signboard above its main gate, upon which words could be seen, written in calligraphy as bold as dancing dragons and phoenixes. Sublime Spirit Temple. Tao Divinity Temple. Heaven's Severing Temple. Within each of the three temples sat an old man and a young man. The old men looked like statues, and the young men looked like chosen. Within those three temples, the three seemingly young men all began to kowtow to the old men, and then speak. The mountains and seas are in chaos. Please begin the fighting. Master, as a first-generation echelon cultivator, I have been sealed until this moment. Master, please remove the seals and allow me to fight. Our heaven-severing branch exists for the express purpose of fighting this war. Dien, please remove the seals for me. The three old men did not respond. It was as if they were awaiting further orders. Within the ninth mountain and sea, on planet South Heaven, the Li clan spell formation sent powerful ripples out in all directions. At the same time, on the peak of a distant mountain, an old man in a white robe stood there silently, looking up into the sky at the enormous land mass that was the first heaven. A strange light flickered in his eyes. And thus the war begins, he murmured. That old man was none other than Shui Dongliu. //. Rumbling sounds echoed out through the eighth mountain and sea as Meng Hao shot along like lightning. The lightning cauldron floated above his head, dancing with electricity as he suddenly switched positions with an outsider. Behind him was the enraged golden-armored outsider Dao Sovereign, whose eyes were bright red. Normally speaking, he would be fast enough to be able to catch up with Meng Hao. However, Meng Hao was using form displacement transposition. Even the powerful ripples which blasted out through the starry sky, throwing everything into chaos, did not affect him at all. Actually, a chaotic battlefield was the perfect place for Meng Hao to slip along like a ghost. Wherever he went, there were living things that he could switch places with, leaving the pursuing golden-armored outsider completely befuddled. Meng Hao was scheming as always. He actually could have gotten further away from the golden-armored outsider Dao Sovereign, but instead, he kept within a fairly set distance. That ensured that the chase continued, and the outsider didn't divert his attention to other places on the battlefield. Can you do anything other than run away? Well, we'll see how long you can keep it up. The outsider Dao Sovereign's black flame lizard suddenly roared, dispersing into a sea of flames that swept forward at incredible speed. Within that sea of flames were innumerable magical symbols, whose flickering caused the flames to increase their speed dramatically. Meng Hao quickly teleported away, just barely avoiding the searing heat of the flames. An unsightly expression appeared on his face. The battle prowess of a Dao Sovereign helped him to see how lacking he was in certain areas. What a pity! If I could make a breakthrough with my fleshly body, then my battle prowess would definitely be enough to fight a Dao Sovereign, even if I haven't extinguished any more soul lamps. Meng Hao teleported again, and a cold laugh rang out from within the flames. Suddenly, the outsider Dao Sovereign appeared in the flames, his body rapidly growing until he was 3,000 meters tall, a giant looming up into the starry sky. He stamped his foot down into the flames, and a black lightning bolt appeared in his hands. Scales once again spread out across his body, and his tail grew longer. Two horns protruded from the top of his head, and the void around him twisted as intense pressure radiated out. You killed my tribal brother, and now I'll destroy you in body and spirit. The golden-armored Dao Sovereign roared and took a step forward, unleashing some unknown divine ability upon Meng Hao. Meng Hao fell back, and rumbling sounds echoed out as the two of them shot through the starry sky of the eighth mountain and sea. I could lose this guy if I really wanted to, but then he would just start fighting somewhere else. Frowning, Meng Hao sighed inwardly. I might not be able to kill him, but I could trap him or seal him, and that wouldn't be impossible, especially in the right place at the right time. We're in the eighth mountain and sea, which is also the location of the Heaven God Alliance. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as he suddenly thought of the perfect place. Chapter 1320, Returning to the 33 Hells. The 33 Hells. The place Meng Hao planned to go was none other than the 33 Hells. After the first heaven descended and the mountain and sea realm exploded into war, he came to the realization that the Paragon's blood in his Dao fruit was boiling. That also gave him the sensation that his cultivation base, his enlightenment, his everything, was on the verge of advancing by leaps and bounds. Actually, that feeling wasn't limited to just him. All of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm felt the same thing. It was as if the arrival of war prompted the mountain and sea realm to unleash years of reserves which had been built up for the purpose of empowering its people. However, that also caused Meng Hao's heart to sink. He well knew that the fact the mountain and sea realm was doing this meant this war would be extremely difficult. Live for the mountains and seas, die for the mountains and seas. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with determination. He had no idea what the future would bring, nor what his life would be like later on. Even more of an unknown was what would happen to his family and friends throughout the course of the war. Would they survive? He was not a person who fundamentally liked fighting and killing. He just wanted to have plenty of money and be able to live a peaceful and wonderful life with his family and beloved partner. It was a simple dream, but to make it into a reality was no simple thing. Meng Hao understood himself and knew the truth. He was not some wildly ambitious person. His ideals were not far-reaching, nor did he have aspirations to shake heaven and earth. His Tao and his heart were both focused on freedom and independence, on avoiding being constrained or held back. He held no unquenchable thirst to constantly acquire a stronger cultivation base. In fact, if he had anything that could count as a true obsession, it would be his simple desire to be rich. In this life, he had simply gone with the flow and found his own type of happiness. He loved conning people, and he loved collecting promissory notes. To him, that was happiness. But when the first heaven descended, all of those beautiful ideals were swept out of sight because of the outsiders. When Meng Hao saw the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm fighting and dying, his heart grew dark and quiet. The pain he was experiencing made all of his dreams seem like childish fantasies. It was as if he had awoken or perhaps grown up. If the mountains and seas did not exist, then what would be the point of my own, solitary existence? Determination flickered within Meng Hao's eyes. It was a sudden and intense determination, and hope that his cultivation base could become even more powerful. It was not because he wanted to become rich, nor because of his simplistic ideals. Instead, it was because of his home. The mountain and sea realm was his home. His home had been invaded, and his people were already fighting and soaked in blood. He was the future lord of the mountain and sea realm, the 9th-generation demon sealer, and the successor of Paragon 9 seals. He had to get stronger. I can't even kill an outsider Tao sovereign, he thought, eyes glowing coldly. Without a moment's hesitation, he shot as fast as possible into the Heaven God Alliance. His divine sense had been suppressed, making it impossible to send it ahead to scan his destination. However, that did nothing to prevent him from unleashing lightning-like speed. RUMMMBLLLE. He became a scintillating beam of light that shot along, followed close behind by a sea of flames. The 3,000-meter-tall outsider strode along, pursuing him relentlessly. Considering his status and battle prowess, to be unable to kill Meng Hao was a complete humiliation. That was especially the case considering he had personally witnessed Meng Hao cut down his junior tribal brother. Because of that, his hatred soared to the heavens. They shot along, piercing through the starry sky, shattering the void. Wherever they passed, shocked outsiders and mountain and sea cultivators alike got out of the way and didn't dare to approach. Booms rang out as the 3,000-meter-tall giant unleashed magical techniques that were bizarre, completely different from the type seen in the mountain and sea realm. Occasionally, he would transform into a beast which lunged at Meng Hao, gobbling up everything in its path, or slashing at him with razor claws that seemed to appear out of thin air. Most shocking of all was his long tail, which he swept around in a completely domineering fashion. It shattered the starry sky, sending shockwaves out that left Meng Hao completely shaken. Blood oozed out of the corners of Meng Hao's mouth, but he managed to nimbly avoid the blows. Even still, he could feel his cultivation base growing unstable. More than ever he could sense the slight gap that existed between himself and the Tao sovereign level, a gap that could prove fatal, however small it might be. Drakeworm Earthfire, heavens forget. Seeing that the numerous attacks he had unleashed were incapable of even touching Meng Hao, the 3,000-meter-tall outsider's eyes flashed with red light as he roared, performing a double-handed incantation gesture that instantly caused the roaring sea of flames beneath his feet to rise up and transform into the form of an enormous earthfare lizard, which opened its mouth and spat a column of flames out toward Meng Hao. The flames moved with indescribable speed, instantly surging over Meng Hao. Even as blood sprayed out of his mouth, the meat jelly appeared. It let loose a torrent of curses as it transformed into a defensive barrier that protected Meng Hao from the scorching flames. Although it hovered on the verge of melting, it managed to hold out until the end of the attack. Afterward, Meng Hao guiltily sent the meat jelly back into his bag of holding, then gritted his teeth and continued on. Damn it, damn it, damn it, the outsider raged. Unwilling to give up, he continued to chase Meng Hao. With enraged shouts echoing behind him the entire time, Meng Hao eventually reached the territory that had once been the Heaven God Alliance. After speeding along, he soon reached the location of the entrance to the 33 Hells. It was a pitch-black region that seemed capable of consuming anything and everything, a region which emanated an aura of rot that caused the outsider Dao Sovereign's eyes to flicker. This aura, he thought, heart trembling. Meng Hao didn't hesitate for a moment before charging in. Although the 33 Hells hadn't actually opened, as soon as he entered the area, greed's life force essence stirred into action and began to spread out. Instantly, powerful ripples sprang up in the void, distorting everything, as if the opening were just about to begin. Meng Hao suddenly stopped in place, then turned around with cold eyes to look at the outsider Dao Sovereign outside of the region of pitch black. "You've been chasing me for long enough. If you want to fight, well then, let's fight here." Meng Hao's voice echoed out, filled with deadly antagonism. Then he wiped the blood from his mouth, and the murderous gleam in his eyes grew even more intense. The 3,000-meter-tall outsider looked on with flickering eyes, then snorted coldly. The aura in this area was bizarre, but considering the level of his cultivation base, he didn't hesitate to step in and charge toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao reached out with his right hand, and demon weapon Lonlatum appeared. Without any hesitation, abandoning all thoughts of fleeing, he charged forth and began to fight the 3,000-meter giant. Booms rang out as they exchanged thousands of blows in the blink of an eye. Meng Hao summoned numerous mountains, the Blood Demon, his Mastiff, and the Paragon Bridge. Demon weapon Lonlatum screamed as it stabbed through the air, and Meng Hao unleashed his 3 fist strikes, each one more dreadful than the last. The outsider also performed incantation gestures. Its scales lifted up, and a windstorm sprang into being. Essence power exploded out, transforming into incredible pressure. The black flames surged, forming into a black flame lizard that roared as it tried to consume Meng Hao. Rumbling echoed out, and blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as he was battered backward relentlessly. As for the outsider Dao Sovereign, his face flickered as demon weapon Lonlatum stabbed a bloody gash into his chest. Although his wounds healed rapidly, Meng Hao, despite being injured more severely, was actually healing even faster. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with starlight as he transformed into a meteor which shot dazzlingly through the starry sky. As he closed in, the outsider performed a double-handed incantation gesture, then waved his hands, causing the black flame lizard to butt out with its head. A boom could be heard as the meteor shattered. However, even as that happened, Meng Hao in azure rock form shot out like a bolt of lightning, piercing through the lizard and appearing directly in front of the outsider Dao Sovereign. The outsider's face flickered, and just when he was about to fall back, azure-colored talons slashed out with the strength to shatter metal and stone. "Looking to die," the outsider Dao Sovereign said, eyes gleaming with ferocity. He allowed Meng Hao's rock claws to dig out his right eye, ignoring the resulting pain as his own right hand shot out to grab viciously onto the rock. A boom rang out as the azure rock was crushed. However, no blood and flesh exploded out, only countless motes of light. Meanwhile, a figure was speeding off into the distance. "Die!" screamed the outsider as Meng Hao fled. A blood-colored light rose up from the outsider as a boundless aura of death converged upon it. Astonishingly, this was death curse magic. A boom could be heard as a sealing symbol appeared in front of Meng Hao. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as he was forced back. He uncontrollably coughed up mouthful after mouthful of blood as his chest began to rot and his life force faded. A powerful aura of death began to consume him. "You took my eye and killed my junior tribal brother. Don't worry, after I kill you, I'll refine your blood to find everyone related to you and kill them all." The 3,000-meter outsider flickered into motion, lifting his right hand up to transform the sea of flames into a huge statue which struck out toward Meng Hao with its palm. That palm caused the aura of death that permeated the area to roil and emit rumbling noises, the starry sky to tremble, and the heavens to fade. However, it was at this point that Meng Hao's mouth twisted into a derisive smile. The outsider suddenly felt a profoundly uneasy feeling spring up in its heart, but before it could do anything, a gigantic rift suddenly appeared in the void beneath Meng Hao's feet. As soon as that rift appeared, Meng Hao shot inside. The 3,000-meter giant shivered as a sensation of deadly crisis rose up in its heart. That sensation came from within the rift itself, wherein the outsider could sense the fluctuations of a shocking aura. He had the premonition that if he entered that rift, he would be facing some deadly situation. Without any hesitation, he turned to leave. However, even as he did, Meng Hao reached out with his right hand, unleashing the star-plucking magic. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the outsider Dao Sovereign was viciously dragged backward. The outsider's eyes burned with rage, and he unleashed all the cultivation base power he could muster to break free. Even as he fell back, breaking away from Meng Hao's star-plucking magic, Meng Hao's derisive smile grew wider. "Form displacement transposition," he said softly. Rumbling could be heard as he and the outsider Dao Sovereign switched places. The outsider was still moving backward, but now he was moving backward into the rift. Although his face fell and he stopped almost immediately, he was still some distance away from the exit. /expand. The outsider Dao Sovereign's face fell immediately. He had no idea where he was, but he could sense that the aura of death in this place was indescribably powerful. He could also tell that within the aura of death was a type of powerful sealing. And yet, even that wasn't the most frightening thing. Most frightening of all was that he could sense dozens of auras in this place that were terrifying even to him. Each and every one of them was equivalent to paragons. Furthermore, those auras were filled with chaos, with greed, with a hunger for anything living, as if they were lying in wait for his chi, blood, and cultivation base. Suddenly, he realized what this place was, and his heart was battered by waves of intense shock. The 33 Hells. He knew what the 33 Hells were, a place where Paragon 9 seals had sealed other paragons long ago. In fact, the 33 Heavens had long since carried out detailed investigations regarding the 33 Hells, and had come to the conclusion that, to the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, it was a place where good fortune or great catastrophe were equally possible. However, to anyone not from the mountain and sea realm, it was a place of certain death. As of this moment, he felt as if he had become food to be devoured by these 33 Hells. "No," he roared in rage. He shot forward in an attempt to fly out of the opening, but how could Meng Hao be willing to let him do so? He had set this entire situation up to trap this outsider, and had gone to great lengths to lure him inside. How could he possibly let him emerge? "With the exception of the successor of Paragon 9 Seals," said Meng Hao, "or someone else with his approval, no one can use this place to increase their cultivation base. This outsider Dao Sovereign is definitely going to die in there." His eyes glittered as greed's life force essence exploded out within him. The 33 Hells suddenly trembled. A dense mist poured out, and the sound of clanking iron chains could be heard, along with angry roars. Meng Hao waved his right hand, summoning the Paragon Bridge. As it crushed down, greed's life force essence exploded out. Not only did the mist within the rift grow thicker, but the ground at the base of the stone steel therein also split and cracked, and an enormous gravitational force sprang up. The outsider Dao Sovereign's face flickered with astonishment, and he let out a roar of fury. He was now shaking, going all out with every bit of power he could summon to try to escape. However, an iron chain whipped through the air, wrapping around him. Then the mists churned as if a giant were approaching, and simultaneously the outsider was dragged in. The shocking gravitational force pulled on the outsider, making it impossible for him to flee. He stared with wide eyes as the rift slowly began to close. Madness flickered in his gaze, as well as a towering, venomous hatred. "No!" Even as he roared, rumbling sounds echoed out as a blood-colored light sprang up. It was a shield that emanated the aura of a paragon. With that protection, he was able to break free from the giant's iron chains and shoot up into the sky. However, even as he neared the rift, it closed up. "Rumble!" The outsider Dao Sovereign roared, and his eyes shone with fear as he looked back down into the mists below him. Apparently, the mists themselves weren't affected by the gravitational force. As he looked, he suddenly realized that a pair of greedy-looking eyes had appeared therein. What caused him to tremble even more than before was that he could sense that after this world had been closed off from the outside, it was as if the entire place had awoken. A voice suddenly spoke out as if from far beneath the ground, accompanied by laughter that filled with hope and yearning. "Flesh and blood, a soul, a cultivation base. If I consume him, I can extend my life for another 10,000 years. It's been a long, long time since I tasted a Dao Sovereign." Massive rumbling could be heard as the trembling outsider Dao Sovereign roared, pouring all of the power he could, even his life force, into the blood-colored paragon shield. His eyes were bright red as he battered the heavens he saw above him, hoping to break open an exit and flee before he was consumed. Outside of the 33 Hells, Meng Hao's face was pale. He wiped the blood from his mouth, then flickered into motion. After leaving the 33 Hells, he looked back at the pitch-black region, and his eyes flashed coldly. Hopefully the outsider Dao sovereign will be killed by this place and become nothing more than fertilizer for it. Then, when I come back later, I can absorb that power to help me to get stronger. If he isn't killed, at least he'll be trapped for a while. When he thought about the blood-colored shield the outsider Dao sovereign had used, and the intense aura it had emitted, it was clear that it was a protective item gifted by a paragon. Even if he can figure out a way to escape, it won't happen any time soon. By that time, I should be prepared to cut down a Dao sovereign in battle. Meng Hao's eyes glowed brightly as he turned away from the 33 hells. Now that his divine sense was no longer being suppressed, he sent it out to fill the entire 8th mountain and sea. What he saw were cultivators of the mountain and sea realm fighting fiercely with the outsiders from the first heaven. Because of the previous war between the 7th and 8th mountains and seas, the cultivators were familiar with battle and had concentrated their attacks on 2 fronts. Other than those 2 fronts, the other main battle was being fought on the 8th mountain itself. The Lord of the 8th mountain and sea and one of the 5 incarnations of the outsider Dao sovereign were fighting back and forth, shaking the entire 8th mountain. As the ripples of magical techniques spread out, Meng Hao almost immediately caught sight of his grandpa Meng beating back the Dao sovereign clone over and over. Grandpa, he thought, vanishing. When he reappeared, he was on a battlefield filled with cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea and outsiders from the first heaven. As soon as he appeared, his cultivation base surged and his divine sense swept out. Fully half of the nearby outsiders let out miserable screams as their heads exploded. Meng Hao snorted coldly, then vanished again. This time, he appeared on a battlefield with cultivators of the 8th mountain and sea. Again, his divine sense swept out, provoking miserable shrieks as one outsider after another exploded. Such a vast number of deaths instantly filled the outsiders' hearts with shock and fear. However, Meng Hao didn't even pause. He vanished again, reappearing at the peak of the 8th mountain. The moment he appeared, his grandfather was unleashing an attack backed by the power of the mountains and seas. The outsider Dao sovereign's clone coughed up some blood and fell back. However, Meng Hao appeared just behind him, eyes flickering with killing intent as he clenched his fist and punched out with the god-slaying fist. Rumbling booms echoed out as the clone's face flickered. He had no time to evade, and the fist strike struck him directly on the back. Half of his body instantly shattered, and he let out a miserable shriek. He shot away from Meng Hao, his body healing, but his aura severely weakened. When he turned back and saw Meng Hao, his face fell. "If you're not dead, then what happened to Long Lindsay?" "Oh, so his name was Long Lindsay," Meng Hao replied coolly. He took a step forward, and as he did, the Lord of the 8th mountain and sea, Meng Hao's grandfather, approached. After seeing it was Meng Hao, he breathed a sigh of relief, and his eyes shone with love and reminiscence. Years had passed, but he had never imagined that his young grandson would grow up to be like this. The outsider Dao sovereign's face fell again, and a gleam of disbelief flickered in his eyes. He was well aware of Long Lindsay's true battle prowess, and although it was somewhat weaker than his own, he was now split into 5 parts. On the other hand, Long Lindsay had attempted to kill this very same person without splitting himself apart. Therefore, Long Lindsay had been able to use all of his battle prowess. And yet he had been defeated. By this point he could sense that Long Lindsay's aura had vanished. This caused the clone to gasp, and without the slightest bit of hesitation, he began to flee. Too many miscalculations had been made in this attack. He had underestimated this mountain and sea lord. In fact, his clones were suffering setbacks all over the mountain and sea realm. Worst of all was this lord of the 8th mountain and sea, who had successively defeated him again and again. As for the cultivator who had just appeared, the actual level of his cultivation base seemed low. However, he had defended himself against the attack of a paragon, and not even Long Lindsay had been a match for him. The outsider Dao sovereign clone could think of only one thing to do, and that was to flee. "Did I say you could leave?" growled Grandpa Meng. He stamped down with his right foot, causing the starry sky around the outsider Dao sovereign to distort as a huge sealing mark appeared. At the same time, Meng Hao extended his right hand, performed an incantation gesture, and pointed out with his finger. It was the 8th demon sealing hex. Although Meng Hao had not been a match for Long Lindsay, this was merely a Dao sovereign's clone, and killing him would be as easy as flipping over his hand. As soon as Meng Hao waved his finger, the clone stopped in place, a shocked look on his face. Simultaneously, Grandpa Meng looked over in surprise at Meng Hao and said, "E." Meng Hao waved his finger again. It was the 7th demon sealing hex, karmic hexing. Rumbling could be heard as blood sprayed from the outsider's mouth. His karma was thrown into chaos, prompting a miserable scream. Next was the sixth hex, which caused a gray sealing mark to appear on his forehead. Then a boom rang out as the mark shattered, disintegrating his head. However, he wasn't dead yet. He quickly recovered but was even weaker than before. After that came the fifth hex, the inside-outside hex. Cracks spread out all over his body, and a blood-curdling scream rang out as the clone collapsed into pieces. Things weren't over yet, though. Even as he collapsed, Meng Hao unleashed the second hex. Real unreal hexing. Even as his collapsing body began to reform and he fled off into the distance, all of the shattered remnants of his body were transformed from being real into something unreal. A wretched shriek rang out in the moment before he died. Everything about him transformed into ash. This outsider Dao sovereign clone was absolutely no match for Meng Hao. Meng Hao's battle prowess might not be on par with Ksidagarbha's, but he could still be considered a peak expert in the mountain and sea realm. "Well done," Grandpa Meng said, laughed heartily. The love in his eyes was clear as he looked at Meng Hao. Meng Hao turned excitedly, clasping hands and bowing as he said, "Hayar offers greetings, grandfather." Grandfather and grandson looked at each other, and their hearts filled with emotions and memories that would be difficult to describe without using many, many words. Eventually, Meng Hao asked about his grandpa Fang. After a moment of silence, Grandpa Meng sighed and said, "He is not in the mountain and sea realm. I complied with the instructions given by Senior Outsider and successfully became the Lord of the Eighth Mountain and Sea. Unfortunately, I've been asleep ever since then. However, your Grandpa Fang is a born warrior, with latent talent exceeding even your father's. Senior Outsider took a liking to him and gave him some very important responsibilities." After a moment of silence, Meng Hao looked at his grandfather and asked, "Who is this outsider you refer to?" Chapter 13:21. Grandfather and grandson reunite. Chapter 13:22. Arriving in the seventh mountain. "He calls himself Shui Dongliu," Grandpa Meng said slowly. As soon as Meng Hao heard that name, his jaw dropped and his eyes filled with a strange gleam. He stood there quietly for a moment as numerous connections were made in his mind. All of a sudden things seemed much clearer. He nodded. "Grandpa, I sent Grandma and the Ming clan ancestral mansion to the ninth mountain and sea. Unfortunately, the first heaven descended right afterwards. Furthermore, the Lord of the ninth mountain and sea and I have a beef with each other." "The Lord of the ninth mountain and sea, Jietian. How dare he?" Grandpa Meng's eyes flashed with coldness. "After I take care of things here in the eighth mountain and sea, I'll go to the ninth mountain and sea, and if Jietian is devoted to the mountain and sea realm, then I'll go easy on him. Otherwise," killing intent flickered in his eyes. Meng Hao instantly felt a little bit better. He could sense from the cultivation base fluctuations that Grandpa Meng was even stronger than Lord White, being more than half a step into the six essences level. The only reason he hadn't been able to immediately vanquish the outsider Dao Sovereign's clone was because he had just awoken and was still clearing his head. However, he was already reaching the point of being able to unleash the full power of his cultivation base. Grandpa Meng looked at Meng Hao, and although he wasn't sure exactly why Meng Hao didn't want to return to the ninth mountain and sea, he could tell that his grandson was someone who exceeded the mountain and sea lords within the mountain and sea realm. "You've grown up, and you have an astonishing cultivation base," he said. "The mountain and sea realm is unstable now, and all cultivators have their own missions to accomplish. You follow your heart and do whatever it is you need to do. Don't worry about the Fang clan and the ninth mountain and sea," he said. "The eighth mountain and sea is already in ruins. I'll gather the survivors and go to the ninth mountain and sea. That is where we will take our stand against the outsiders." Meng Hao stood there silently for a moment before clasping hands and bowing deeply to his grandfather. He looked off in the direction of the ninth mountain and sea, and from what he could sense in his blood, he knew that the Fang clan cultivators were not in any great danger at the moment. Feeling somewhat at ease, he turned and transformed into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. His destination was the fourth mountain and sea. Leaving the ninth mountain and sea behind, his purpose was to bring Su Qing home. Now that war had broken out, he was feeling more and more uneasy. That unease had begun to grow as soon as the first heaven had begun to descend. Back on the eighth mountain, Grandpa Meng stood there looking at Meng Hao making his way off into the distance. A loving expression could be seen on his face, and also traces of how profoundly he hated having to part with his grandson. Senior Outsider once said that when the mountain and sea tribulation arrives, everything will be transformed into dust, he said softly. However, there is something special about the ninth mountain. It will eventually become the only mountain left. He even said that he wasn't sure if any of the mountains and seas would survive the catastrophe. He said that all he could do was search for a certain hope. Apparently the hope he was talking about was Hayar. Looking away from Meng Hao, he sent his divine sense out and quickly caught sight of some outsiders. Eyes flickering with icy killing intent, he sprang into motion. Meng Hao sped along through the starry sky of the eighth mountain and sea. Soon, he reached the rift where he had fought Lord White. By now, that rift had collapsed, leaving behind only faint traces. Meng Hao hovered there, eyes flickering as he took a step forward. Although he seemed to be just strolling along, he was actually walking in a circle. He moved faster and faster until the essence of time began to emanate out. The void distorted and the starry sky was affected. Soon, a blurry vortex appeared, which spun around and around as it grew. It went from 30 meters to 300 meters, until eventually, Meng Hao could be seen only as ghost images. Innumerable copies of Meng Hao could be seen as the vortex rumbled out to 3,000 meters. As the power of time travel exploded out, many people from the eighth mountain and sea sensed what was happening. It was at around this time that a rift suddenly appeared within that vortex. This was none other than the rift which had connected the seventh and eighth mountains and seas. In almost the exact same instant that the rift appeared, the countless reflections of Meng Hao which were spinning around the vortex transposed, once again forming a single version. Then, he stepped into the rift and vanished. After he disappeared, the vortex faded away and soon, the rift quickly vanished and the starry sky returned to normal. Within the rift that connected the two mountains and seas, Meng Hao was a beam of bright light that moved with speed far exceeding Lord White's. In virtually the blink of an eye, he was already on the other side. Soon, he could sense the aura of the curse power which was unique to the seventh mountain and sea. Without the slightest hesitation, he burst out through the exit portal. Almost immediately, a cold snort echoed out. Someone has appeared. It seems my calculations were correct. These mountain and sea realm aboriginals really are trying to escape from the eighth mountain and sea through here. Well, now that you're here, don't try to run. Almost immediately, the magic of a divine ability rumbled toward Meng Hao, and black flames instantly surrounded him. As soon as he saw the flames, he could tell that this was an outsider's magical technique, backed by the cultivation base of a Tao Lord. Although powerful experts of that realm could rock their surroundings with the mere stamp of a foot, to Meng Hao, they were like insects that could be killed as easily as flipping over a hand. His eyes flickered coldly as he suddenly sucked in a deep breath, inhaling the black flames through his nose and mouth. Then he looked around, even as gasps rang out in reaction to what he had just done. The rift entrance to the seventh mountain and sea was very near the seventh mountain, and the entire area was littered with corpses. 8 outsiders were present, and shockingly, their cultivation-based fluctuations were that of the Tao realm. Clearly, they were lying in wait to slaughter anyone who appeared here. But now, after seeing Meng Hao simply inhale the essence flames that the Tao Lord had unleashed, they all gasped, and their faces fell. That was especially true of the outsider Tao Lord, whose eyes went wide. Mind reeling, he immediately fell back, but in that same instant, Meng Hao appeared directly in front of him, reached out, grabbed him by the throat, and threw him to the side. His scales shattered, and his flesh and blood turned into a gory mass. A blood-curdling scream echoed out as he was completely shredded into pieces. Immediately, the other outsiders began shaking all the way down to their tails, and instantly tried to flee, using all the power they could muster. Tao Sovereign, he's a true Tao Sovereign. I thought Siddhagarbha from the fourth mountain was the only true Tao Sovereign in the mountain and sea realm, but he's fighting with the Imperial Lord. He can't be here at the same time. Who is this guy? Damn it, we just ambushed a true Tao Sovereign. The 8 outsiders were completely taken aback. Filled with terror and shock, scales shivering and tails shaking, they tried to flee. However, Meng Hao sent his divine sense out, a single thought that filled the entire area. Instantly, the nascent divinities of all of the one essence and 2 essences outsider Tao realm experts were shattered. Their minds were wiped away, leaving behind soulless corpses which toppled down out of the starry sky. As soon as Meng Hao's divine sense swept out, he saw everything in the seventh mountain and sea floating in his mind, and the seemingly endless amounts of outsiders present. He saw numerous black cubes floating in the starry sky of the seventh mountain and sea, the largest of which were 30,000 meters wide, and the smallest of which were only a few hundred meters wide. The outsiders were pouring in and out of these cubes. Apparently, They were some sort of military stronghold. Black flames surrounded the cubes, and lightning crackled on their surfaces. The starry sky around them was also distorted, as if the cubes were organized into some sort of spell formation. The seventh mountain and sea should have been occupied by cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. However, what was visible now were mostly outsiders. Few native cultivators could be seen, and the majority present were dead. Most of the cultivators from the seventh mountain and sea were actually in the eighth mountain and sea. The ones who had remained behind were for the most part low-level, making it extremely easy for the outsiders to occupy the place. Meng Hao's face was grim, and his fury toward the outsiders only continued to grow as he discovered that they didn't even spare the mortals. To them, it didn't matter if someone was a cultivator or not. Anyone from the mountain and sea realm was guilty. Of the 4 great planets in the seventh mountain and sea, 3 were already shattered and in ruins. Because of that, the curse power that normally filled the seventh mountain and sea was now in complete chaos. Lord White, even death cannot atone for your crimes. Meng Hao growled, eyes bloodshot. As he examined the situation with his divine sense, he noticed that there was a force of over 10,000 outsiders attacking the final planet, the largest planet of the seventh mountain and sea. There were still tens of thousands of cultivators left alive on that planet. Those fighters were the last remnants of the cultivators of the seventh mountain and sea. Even in the brief moment in which his divine sense swept over the planet, Meng Hao could see many cultivators of the seventh mountain and sea choosing to self-detonate instead of being killed. In the last moments before they died, the words they shouted echoed within Meng Hao's divine sense. Live for the mountains and seas, die for the mountains and seas. Booms echoed out around that group of tens of thousands of cultivators as they fought to defend the planet and all the lives on it. Among those cultivators Meng Hao caught sight of the seventh mountain's echelon cultivator, Xianxia. Xianxia was completely soaked in blood and had been severely injured. Despite that, he roared in rage as he fought against the enemy. He was a body cultivator, and the weapon he wielded was the very same valuable treasure he had taken from Meng Hao years before. He was currently surrounded by a host of enemies with whom he was desperately fighting. 1. Meng Hao loaned a battle axe to Xianxia, which he kept, without permission, when they parted ways in Chapter 1151. Currently, a Dao Realm outsider was laughing coldly while shooting toward Xianxia in a beam of light. Even as he closed in, Meng Hao snorted coldly, causing his divine sense to vibrate. Instantly, the Dao Realm outsider who was attacking Xianxia let out a miserable shriek and then exploded, killed instantly. At the same time, Meng Hao took a step forward, vanishing as he headed towards the fighting. Chapter 1323, War Requires Spirit. Of the 4 planets which orbited the seventh mountain, 3 were destroyed, and had become nothing more than fields of swirling rubble and dust hanging in the starry sky. The only remaining planet was the one known as Tiger Cage. 1. I'm sure some of you will remember planet Tiger Cage. It has been mentioned 3 times in the story, in chapters 301, 322, and 979. Currently, Xianxia and the tens of thousands of cultivators who were the broken remnants of the forces of the seventh mountain and sea were there on planet Tiger Cage, fighting a deadly battle with the outsiders. The fighting was bloody and bitter, and occasionally the booms of self-detonation rang out. Sky and land were both as red as blood, and the vicious and maddened outsiders were fueling divine abilities with their own life force, causing black seas of flame to scorch everything in their paths. Massive fissures were spreading out across the surface of the planet, and the cities and life forms there were all trembling. To them, it was as if the end of days had come. Even the sky seemed to be on the verge of collapsing, and as the cultivators and the outsiders fought, the only thing they seemed to have in common was that they were all engaged in a life-or-death struggle. Xianxia was actually not the strongest cultivator among the tens of thousands of survivors. However, because of his status as an echelon cultivator, his words carried much weight, and he was currently leading a large group of cultivators into battle. He was soaked in gore, to the point where it almost seemed like he was clothed in blood itself. His skin was crisscrossed with wounds, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. He looked completely and utterly fearsome. However, beneath that fearsomeness lurked sadness and despair. Live for the mountains and seas, die for the mountains and seas. Xianxia threw his head back and laughed, and in response, the cultivators at his back let out mighty roars. Murderous auras sprang up. They might be fighting a losing battle, but they would still kill as many outsiders as they could. There was no path of escape. In the seventh mountain and sea, All the areas which formerly pledged allegiance to Lord White had already fallen into enemy hands. The cultivators had watched as 3 of their planets were destroyed, and countless lives were sacrificed. The 7th mountain and sea was relentlessly taken over by the outsiders, and the local cultivators could do nothing but fume and rage. Now, the only reason they had left to live was to fight. Even if they only had one breath left to breathe, they would use it to kill one more outsider. A boom rang out, and Yuan Jian coughed up a mouthful of blood. He was facing a coldly sneering Dao Realm outsider, who bore down on him as fast as lightning. The outsider's right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and black flames spread out to form a huge mouth which shot out to consume Yuan Jian. Yuan Jian laughed bitterly. When he had faced Dao Realm outsiders before, there had always been Dao Realm experts of the 7th mountain and sea to lock them down. But now, all of those Dao Realm experts were either dead or seriously injured. Yuan Jian was staring extermination in the face. His eyes flickered with madness as he glared at the Dao Realm outsider and prepared to self-detonate. The other cultivators under his command also stared with bloodshot eyes and prepared to follow him in self-detonation. The self-detonation of a single cultivator wouldn't do anything to a Dao Realm expert, but if 10 of them detonated, or 100, or 1,000, it would be a different story. The massive accumulation of force in such an explosion was power that would shock even a Dao Realm expert. The outsider's eyes widened and he frowned. Just when he was about to take defensive measures, a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering divine sense suddenly exploded out. It was a divine sense bursting with killing intent, hatred, and madness, and as it erupted out across the battlefield, the Dao Realm outsider's eyes went wide, and he shouted in alarm. Dao, all he could utter was a single word before his head exploded and his body shattered. In almost the same instant, numerous other outsiders on the battlefield screamed miserably, expressions those of terror as they subsequently exploded. From far up above in the starry sky, the battlefield almost looked like a field of blooming flowers of blood. The surviving outsiders were shocked and terrified. They immediately tried to escape the planet, leaving the cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea standing there in shock. However, their hatred could not be diminished, and they immediately attacked the fleeing outsiders. Yuan Jian was trembling, but had no time to think, and immediately joined in the slaughter. It was at this point that a new figure appeared on the battlefield. It was Meng Hao, who had just teleported in. Immediately, he extended his right hand and made a vicious clawing motion. The power of the mountains and seas erupted out. Although it wasn't a vast amount of the power, not even enough to fight Dao's sovereign experts, any of the outsiders under that realm would be crushed as easily as dried twigs. Rumbling sounds echoed out as an enormous illusory hand appeared in the starry sky. Boundless ripples emanated from the majestic hand as it clawed down toward the outsiders. The starry sky trembled, and numerous rifts were slashed open. In the blink of an eye, the area in the starry sky occupied by the outsiders was completely crushed. Rumble! Miserable screams and roars of rage alike were suddenly cut off. A moment later, the huge hand vanished, and all that remained was drifting ash. The battlefield went silent, and the cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea looked around, stunned. Yuan Jian turned his head, and through the crowds he spotted Meng Hao. "Meng Hao," he said, a smile breaking out on his face. Unfortunately, it was a smile that was bitter and even hollow. Even though more than 10,000 outsiders had just been killed, no cries of joy rang out, and no excitement could be seen. The cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea simply stood there quietly. When they turned to face Meng Hao, there almost didn't seem to be any life in their eyes, as if their souls were already dead. They well knew that the number of outsiders currently in the 7th mountain and sea was completely incalculable. Despite having won a victory in this battle, the next battle would likely result in the complete extermination of the 7th mountain and sea. They silently clasped hands and bowed to Meng Hao, then began to disperse to carry their fallen comrades away, and to expunge the area of the sordid blood of the outsiders. Everything was as still as death. As Meng Hao looked around at the listless cultivators, he felt as if his heart were being stabbed. Yuan Jian grimaced from the pain of his injuries as he approached Meng Hao. Then he looked around at all his comrades and bitterly commented, "They're like this because we have no hope. Meng Hao, do you really think that we can win this war?" He seemed confused, and from the way he asked the question, it almost seemed as if he were inwardly searching for some way to pull himself together and rise to the situation, even if whatever he found was a false hope. Meng Hao had seen war before, but he had never experienced anything like he had just now. His heart hurt, but he was infinitely moved. He looked around at the tens of thousands of cultivators of the seventh mountain and sea, and he saw how exhausted they were. He saw how despair had taken hold in the depths of their hearts, and he saw how much they hated the outsiders. He suddenly felt the urge to speak. Although he wasn't sure what he should say, it was as if there were a voice deep inside of him desperate to cry out, to rally the people around him. Fellow Taoists of the mountains and seas, I am Meng Hao, echelon cultivator from the ninth mountain and sea. I don't know for sure whether or not we'll win this war, but what I do know is that as we speak, Paragon Sea Dream is fighting the outsider Paragon, right up there. As he spoke, his voice began to grow impassioned, and he pointed up toward the heights of the starry sky. I also know that the Lord of the fourth mountain and sea, K. Siddhagarbha, is fighting the outsider imperial lord. All of the other mountain and sea lords are fighting with incarnations of an outsider Tao sovereign. Furthermore, just moments ago, I managed to trap their other Tao sovereign in the 33 hells. If he doesn't die there, then at the least, he'll be unable to emerge for some time. Another thing I know is that, as of this moment, I, Meng Hao, am the only cultivator who can fight at the Tao sovereign level that is currently not fighting. I don't know whether or not we can secure victory in this war, but the mountain and sea realm will not be overthrown easily. We are the descendants of the Paragon immortal realm, and we have lasted all the way down to this day. We are the mountain and sea realm, and the war has only just begun. How could we possibly lose hope now? Even as Meng Hao looked out at the cultivators of the seventh mountain and sea, his heart bursting with powerful exhortations, a fierce fight was raging above planet South Heaven in the ninth mountain and sea. The Li Clan spell formation covered the entire planet, ensuring that any outsiders who approached were destroyed before they could set foot on planet South Heaven. The sky rained with the blood of the outsiders. Of course, that blood was filthy to the point that it could harm cultivators and even devastate the earth. Therefore, it was not allowed to touch down onto the ground, but was dissipated into a mist before the very eyes of the cultivators of planet South Heaven. Standing atop a distant mountain was Shui Dongliu, who was staring up into the sky, a perpetual look of sorrow in his eyes. At some point, an ancient ship had come to appear off to the side, floating there in the air. It was a ship that no one could see, almost as if it didn't exist. An old man sat cross-legged at the prow of the boat with his back to the world, as if he had forsaken all heaven and earth. If Meng Hao were here, he would instantly recognize this ship and this old man. He had boarded this same ship back when the 10th Wang clan patriarch had stolen his Tao foundation, leaving him on the brink of death. The ship had taken him on a dreamlike voyage through the mountain and sea realm, a voyage which had opened Meng Hao's eyes to the wider world. 1. Meng Hao's time on the ship with the old man occurred starting in around chapter 683. I didn't realize it early on in ISSTH, but it seems likely that this old man on the boat is a character from Urgen's other novel Beseech the Devil, a guy whose name is something along the lines of Old Man Extermination. Please note I said likely, because it's only my speculation. I didn't even check on the Chinese internet. Whether it had been intentional or not, the old man on the ship had healed Meng Hao's injuries and given him a bit of life force that had enabled him to keep living for a time. Right now, that very same ship was floating in midair in front of Shui Dongliu. Shui Dongliu stood there at the peak of the mountain, and the old man on the boat sat there with his back turned to the world. Although their eyes had not made contact, it clearly seemed as if they were looking at each other. Suddenly, an ancient voice could be heard as the old man on the ship spoke. Is all this necessary? Your hope has always been doomed to fail. This was apparently the first time this man had ever truly spoken, and his voice seemed to echo out from the depths of time itself. As he spoke, the ship upon which he sat seemed even more illusory than before. Shui Dongliu didn't respond. Instead, he continued to stare off into the distance. After a long moment passed, the old man on the ship sighed. Then he and the ship slowly faded away. In almost the same moment that the ship and the old man vanished, Shui Dongliu suddenly turned his head. Someone was approaching him silently from behind, a young man in a black robe. His expression was calm and his features extraordinary, but he had an astonishing murderous aura roiling off of him. He was none other than the person who had taught Meng Hao the time-walking technique, Slaughter. 2. Previous times Slaughter appeared include chapters 1122, 1142, and 1205. He looked coldly at Shui Dongliu, and killing intent flashed through his eyes. I pondered the matter for some time. I should have dispersed, so why was I brought back? It wasn't until seeing you that I understood. One time I'll help you, only one time. With that, Slaughter looked deeply at Shui Dongliu, then vanished into thin air. Shui Dongliu stood there thoughtfully. The entire time he hadn't spoken a single word. Soon the sun set, night fell, and the moon shone, casting a long shadow behind him. "Deliver the people, lose the world," he murmured softly. "Lose the people, deliver the world. The choice has long since been made." A strange, anticipatory light slowly began to gleam in his eyes. The mountain and sea realm is at war, and now the spirit of the people must rise. Chapter 13:24. The Agreement of Planet Tiger Cage. Back in the seventh mountain and sea, the previously listless eyes of the cultivators began to flicker with light as passion stirred in their hearts. They suddenly recalled the image of Meng Hao slaying the outsiders with one blow. Couple that sight with what he had told them just now, and a certain title began to ring out in their minds and hearts. Dao Sovereign. What Meng Hao had done, and what he had said, made it clear to these cultivators exactly how strong he was in battle. Battle prowess like that would be vitally important in the mountain and sea realms war. There were too many things that these cultivators didn't understand, and the terrifying power of the 33 heavens was something they didn't even want to think about. They were in such despair that they would cling desperately to even the slightest scrap of hope. As of this moment, hope was now kindling in their eyes. To them, a cultivator like Meng Hao represented the absolute pinnacle of the mountain and sea realm, and if he said that he hadn't lost hope or faith, then they believed him. "It is we of the mountain and sea realm who called for this war," Meng Hao continued. "Therefore this is not a war being waged upon us by the 33 heavens. No, this is us, waging war on the 33 heavens. We will break open those 33 heavens so that the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm can look up and see the true starry sky above our heads." As Meng Hao spoke, the light in the eyes of the surrounding cultivators grew brighter. However, words alone were not enough. As Meng Hao looked out at the crowds around him, a wild notion suddenly sprang up inside him. He knew that what he was seeing right now was not an isolated incident. Whichever mountain and sea one went to right now, one would surely find similar thoughts of despair running through the hearts and minds of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. Perhaps the degree of despair would be different in different places, and perhaps some people could suppress the despair and turn it into killing intent, but some would surely tremble in fear and lose their will to fight. If that happened, then the war truly would be a hopeless one. As he realized how difficult this war would be, he suddenly gained understanding of a simple truth. War needed heroes and at the same time did not. The reason it needed heroes was because they could rouse the spirits of their comrades. Simultaneously, the reason heroes were not needed was because a single person can never determine victory in a war, even with someone as powerful as Paragon 9 Seals. The people were delivered, but the world was lost. War required unity. A people needed unity. It was only by means of unity that the cultivators of the mountains and seas could rise up. Only with a burning spirit could they fight back against all odds and have the fortitude to fight to the death with the 33 heavens. "There's something I need to do," he murmured softly. Usually, he didn't think of himself as the lord of the mountain and sea realm. That was something that would happen in the future, not at this moment. Perhaps that's the wrong attitude, he thought. If there is no future, then there will be no lord of the mountain and sea realm. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as he looked up into the starry sky toward the first heaven. The crazy idea that had just occurred to him just now was growing stronger. Taking a deep breath, he decided to let the notion percolate for a while. With that, he turned and headed out across Planet Tiger Cage with Yuan Jian. Behind him, the spirits of the cultivators seemed to have lifted. As they watched Meng Hao leaving, sparks of fire appeared in their hearts and began to burn steadily. One could well imagine what would happen as those sparks burned hotter and brighter. The hearts of those cultivators would ignite, and eventually, the same thing would happen throughout the entire mountain and sea realm. In the end, either they would be burnt by those flames, or the enemy would. Cracks and crevices covered the surface of Planet Tiger Cage. All of the lands were covered with rifts that were only growing larger and wider with time. As of this moment, the planet seemed to be teetering on the verge of collapse. Apparently, the carnage of the war in the mountain and sea realm was focused initially on the 6th and 7th mountains and seas. As Meng Hao looked around at Planet Tiger Cage, his eyes flickered with the desire to kill. Furthermore, his rage toward Lord White still lingered, despite the fact that he had already cut him down. "Now that I think about it, there is still one more traitor among the mountain and sea lords," he thought. Heart filling with icy coldness, he looked off into the distance for a moment, then turned to Xianxia. Brother Yuan, back in the windswept realm, you mentioned that the seventh mountain and sea has God blood. Although Meng Hao was planning to merely pass through, there were still some important things here for him. God blood was something critical for making breakthroughs with the fleshly body. After his recent breakthroughs, his current fleshly body level had actually become an encumbrance. If he could make a breakthrough, then based on the foundation he had built up, he would experience an incredible rise and immediately reach the level of a Tao sovereign. At that time, considering the level of his cultivation base and his terrifying divine sense, he would truly be equipped with the power of a Tao sovereign. After acquiring the Green Emperor's eternal incantation from Lord White, he had made major progress with his eternal stratum. Even still, he could tell that his fleshly body needed to become more powerful before he could be confident in facing the flesh and blood desolation, which was the second of the 7 desolations of ancient realm soul lamp extinguishing. The crazy idea which had come to him required that he have battle prowess truly equivalent to the Tao sovereign level. Only then could he be confident enough to make that idea a reality. Of course we do, replied Xianxia. In the Vale of the Godgrave, however, it's already been occupied by the outsiders. Brother Meng, if you want to go, then I can take you there. Xianxia's eyes gleamed brightly. 1. Xianxia actually mentioned this place back in chapter 1151. Not yet, Meng Hao replied softly. I have a bit of unresolved karma on this planet. Brother Yuan, please wait while I take care of something. With that, he took a step forward and then vanished. Xianxia hovered there silently for a moment, his eyes burning with a will to fight. We're both in the echelon, he thought, but Meng Hao has already reached the point where everyone looks up to him, and yet I still haven't passed through the ancient realm. It's hard to say how long this war will last. I must step into the Tao realm. Xianxia's eyes shone with a flicker of determination. As Meng Hao flew along above the lands of planet Tiger Cage, he felt an aura spreading out from inside of him. It came from deep in the recesses of his cultivation base, where there existed a white diamond-shaped object. Planet Tiger Cage, Tai, Meng Hao murmured. He had never forgotten about that immortal's corpse which had fallen out of the sky back when he was on planet South Heaven. That immortal was none other than Tai, and they had come to an agreement that Meng Hao would return his legacy to planet Tiger Cage. 1. Meng Hao met Tai in chapter 301. At that time, the gift given to him by Tai had been like a precious treasure. Now, it was relatively insignificant. However, Tai had mentioned that by returning his legacy to his home on planet Tiger Cage, Meng Hao could acquire some good fortune. Of course, Meng Hao didn't care too much about that. After all, there was little good fortune that he could acquire now that would be of much help to him. Based on Tai's cultivation base level back, there was nothing he could bestow upon Meng Hao now that would be of any use. Meng Hao had come, not because of any potential good fortune, but rather to keep a promise. As he proceeded along, he cast his senses inward to observe the fluctuations of the diamond inside of him. Soon, a mountain appeared up ahead. It was cracked and crumbling but hadn't fallen apart completely, and when Meng Hao scanned it with divine sense, he found an immortal's cave which had long since been abandoned. Layers of dust covered everything in the immortal's cave, but deep within its recesses was a spell formation. At the very center of the spell formation was a small column of inky jade the size of a hand. On top of that column was a diamond-shaped slot. As soon as Meng Hao got close, his own chest began to radiate light as the diamond-shaped legacy bestowed upon him years ago by Tai suddenly flew out. It moved with incredible speed as it flew through the cracks in the side of the mountain, entering the immortal's cave, lowering itself down toward the spell formation, and settling into the diamond-shaped slot. Meng Hao didn't follow the white diamond. Instead, he hovered outside the mountain, watching. Moments later, his jaw dropped. This. His eyes flickered as he took a step forward, and then suddenly appeared inside of the mountain. Having scanned the mountain with divine sense, he was certain there was nothing unusual lying in wait. Considering the level of his divine sense, there would be few things in existence which could conceal anything from him. Earlier, his divine sense had revealed that the spell formation was emanating fluctuations that seemed to indicate it was searching for an appropriate apprentice upon whom to bestow a legacy. But now, after the diamond sank down into the slot, the spell formation immediately altered. Instead of preparing to deliver a legacy, it was summoning something. Meng Hao hovered outside of the spell formation, face darkening. As he studied the spell formation, he could sense the power of summoning, something that was completely ignoring the 33 heavens above and was instead stretching out to some unknown location. This was Meng Hao's first time seeing a spell formation like this, and was definitely his first time seeing anything which could pierce through the seal of the 33 heavens. Because that diamond-shaped legacy had fed him power for so many years, it also contained a bit of his own aura. Furthermore, that bit of aura appeared to be transforming the summoning power in some way that even Meng Hao didn't understand. This is no legacy. Chumentai, who exactly are you? Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and he let out a cold harumph. Although what was happening was unexpected, considering the level of his current cultivation base, he could simply destroy the spell formation if he wanted to. That might be a violation of his previous oath, but the current mountain and sea realm could ill afford an unknown and unexpected hazard. He had come here because of his promise to repay Chumentai for the good fortune he had bestowed. But now, his face was grim. He would rather incur karma and sully his oath than permit this spell formation to cause any harm to the mountain and sea realm. He reached his hand out, causing a massive burst of power to build up. Just as it was about to blast down onto the spell formation, a voice suddenly spoke out in Meng Hao's mind. It was a voice filled with a pleading tone. It was Chumentai. Please allow me to have some hope. Please, I have no desire to hurt you or do anything to harm the interests of the mountain and sea realm. Please, allow me my hope. The person I want to resurrect, he is my master. Years ago, he sent me away into the cycle of reincarnation. I experienced many things. Eventually, I awoke and remembered my home and who I was back then. I remembered that he had extinguished his own soul fire. I want to resurrect my master. That is my sole purpose in life. Please allow me to have my hope. If you do, I can help you in this mountain and sea war. 2. The fact that Chumentai wanted to resurrect someone was mentioned by Shui Dongliu in chapter 692. And now I would like to share some details from beyond ISSTH, which I don't think counts as spoiler information, but does involve elements from his other books. At this point in the original release of ISSTH, many fans had come to the conclusion that Chumentai is actually a character from Beseech the Devil. Diamond-shaped marks play a significant role in the cultivation in that novel, which was one piece of evidence that points to such a conclusion. If he was a character from Beseech the Devil, then it would be likely that his master was also a character from that book. Many people guessed that his master was none other than Su Ming, the main character of Beseech the Devil. Again, this was merely speculation, based on information up to and including this chapter. Nothing Chumentai said moved Meng Hao at all. He sent his cultivation base power out, and the spell formation began to emit cracking sounds as the summoning was interrupted. However, it was at that point that Chumentai said one last thing, which caused Meng Hao to suddenly stop. I, Chumentai, pledge on my own life that if you preserve this spell formation, I will devote my life to the mountain and sea war. Meng Hao's eyes narrowed. How can you help? He asked. When Chumentai responded, his voice seethed with manic determination. I can help you to seal a 7 essences paragon and make that person your puppet. Chapter 1325, Meng Hao's Heart. Meng Hao was quite shaken. Even after leaving planet South Heaven and traversing the mountain and sea realm, he had never forgotten the kindness Chumentai had shown in blessing him with good fortune, nor the agreement they reached regarding planet Tiger Cage. He had always planned to return Chumentai's legacy to planet Tiger Cage. However, he could never have imagined that the so-called legacy was actually a sham. It had all been a ruse. Meng Hao hovered there silently. He could accept being swindled, but he couldn't accept the existence of a spell formation like this, not if there was even a chance that it could harm the mountain and sea realm. He was responsible for the mountains and seas, and had already borne witness to the tragedy of war. Furthermore, that warfare had already changed him. He had grown up. Therefore, his first reaction upon seeing this spell formation was not to be concerned about the karma he would sow if he broke his oath and destroyed it. However, at the same time, Chumentai's words had moved him. In fact, his mind was spinning and his eyes glowed with bright light. I, Chumentai, swear an oath upon my soul that if anything I have said is untrue, then, no matter if I live or die, I will never again see my master. The madness in Chumentai's voice was growing, and the sincerity of his determination made his pleas seem even more intense. In fact, as he spoke, Meng Hao could sense the vague fluctuations of a powerful oath, and could also detect karma building up within the mountain peak and the spell formation. All of that indicated that the words spoken by Chumentai were true. Meng Hao said nothing at first. He was not a cold and ruthless person, and Tai had bestowed good fortune upon him in the past. If he could choose, he would rather not destroy the man's hope. Furthermore, he had sworn an oath upon his soul. "How is it that you can do such a thing?" Meng Hao asked. "It doesn't matter how I can do it," replied Tai. "Just point out a 7 essences paragon, and I'll take care of the rest." From the sound of his voice, Tai seemed to be throwing caution to the wind. A heaven-defying technique like that would surely come at a heavy price, a price too difficult to even comprehend. Wherever you are, as long as I still live, all you have to do is catalyze this sealing mark, and you can perform the sealing. A mysteriously glowing magical symbol floated out from within the mountain to hover in front of Meng Hao. The symbol flickered and danced, and constant fluctuations rippled about inside of it. It was actually impossible to see clearly, and numerous transformations existed within it. Meng Hao eyed the magical symbol for a moment, and then his eyes flickered with determination. He waved his sleeve, gathering up the magical symbol, and then looking at the mountain for a long moment before turning to leave. Meng Hao could now tell that the reason why planet Tiger Cage still remained intact within the 7th Mountain Sea, the reason why it had not been destroyed, was not because of Yuan Jian and the other cultivators with him. More importantly, it was because of the spell formation inside this mountain, and the remaining power of Tai, which protected the entire planet. Because of that power of protection, even though the surface of the planet was riddled with cracks and crevices, it still remained in one piece, as the spell formation protected both the mountain and the planet. Meng Hao took a step, and was already far off in the distance. Just what sort of entity could inspire one of its servants to be so devoted, to become completely obsessed with resurrecting it? Even as he left, a blurry figure appeared within the middle of the spell formation. It was Tai, and he seemed to be fading away. He was staring into the spell formation itself, trembling, eyes filled with anticipation and reminiscence. "For the sake of others, you closed your eyes for all eternity," he murmured. "After I returned, I could never find you." Tai's voice seemed to be filled with grief as he slowly sat down in the spell formation. "Please return, my master." As Meng Hao made his way off into the distance, he found that the meat jelly had emerged from his bag of holding at some point. It was perched on his shoulder, looking back at the mountain. Then the parrot flew out, landed on his other shoulder, and also looked back. It was a rare occasion when these two living treasures weren't making a ruckus. The meat jelly sighed and said, "Perhaps to that entity, Tai eventually ceased to be simply a servant. Meng Hao, do you think that one day, if you meet your end, I'll be like Tai and do everything I can to try to resurrect you? AI, that is a question very worthy of consideration. Fifth bro, what do you think?" Meng Hao stopped in place. The meat jelly's words just now were definitely the type to make one feel touched, but to hear them coming out of the meat jelly's mouth was quite strange. Lord Fifth was actually pondering a different question. If Lord Fifth ever meets his end, Meng Hao, would you feel sad? Would you try to resurrect me? The parrot looked over at Meng Hao, its expression very serious. "Yes," Meng Hao replied softly. The parrot and meat jelly had followed him for so long that in his heart, he no longer viewed them as simple servants. "Well, Lord Fifth won't die and can't be killed, so you'll never have that chance." "Ha ha ha," the parrot laughed heartily, but as it laughed, a trace of sorrow and grief could be seen in its eyes. However, it quickly passed, and the parrot quickly reverted to its usual simple-minded state. Meng Hao didn't say anything further. A knot had taken root in his heart, an uncomfortable notion that he didn't dare to contemplate or ponder, the reason being that he wasn't sure which side to pick. He had an inkling of the karmic cause of the war of the mountain and sea realm, that it was actually being fought because of the copper mirror. If he simply handed the copper mirror over, could the war be ended? It was a question Meng Hao didn't dare to consider. His family lived in the mountain and sea realm, as did his friends, his masters, and all other living things. But on the other hand, the copper mirror had been with him from his earliest days in the Reliance sect. It had accompanied him and allowed him to grow from being a mere scholar to his current pinnacle. As for the parrot, although Meng Hao pretended to not care very much about it, the truth was that after all these years, he had become very attached to it and could never bear to part with it. "Do I forsake the parrot," he thought, "or forsake the mountain and sea realm? Perhaps the only choice I can make is to forsake myself." Meng Hao sighed inwardly. This was the question he didn't wish to ponder, because he knew that one day he would be forced to make that decision. Who knew what cruel realities he would need to face when the time came to choose? "I have to get stronger," he thought, his eyes glowing brightly. He took a deep breath as he forced himself to stop thinking about that painful question. Then he transformed into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. The meat jelly sat silently on his shoulder, and although the parrot seemed completely oblivious to anything, it was uncharacteristically quiet as it transformed into a multicolored streak that flew into the copper mirror in Meng Hao's bag of holding. Meng Hao continued along quietly, sighing the entire time as he contemplated the enigma that was fate. As of this moment, he was consumed with worry for his family and a deep yearning to reunite with Su Qing. Eventually, he made his way back to Yuan Jian, who was sitting there cross-legged waiting for him. Instead of wasting time with words, Meng Hao simply looked at him and uttered a single sentence. "Take me to the place you mentioned, the Vale of the Godgrave." Yuan Jian's eyes shone with a bright light. Taking a deep breath, he nodded and rose to his feet. Meng Hao flicked his sleeve, and the two of them transformed into bright beams of light that shot off into the starry sky at top speed. Normally speaking, Yuan Jian would never be able to keep up with Meng Hao, so Meng Hao lent him some energy, and they proceeded along to the location Yuan Jian indicated. "I need to get stronger, that way I can slaughter my own path out of the enigma of fate." There was something murderously bleak about Meng Hao now. His previous air of youth and naivete had been wiped away, and the only thing that remained was the grief and pain that came from seeing tragedy play out in the mountain and sea realm. The seventh mountain and sea was now almost completely in the hands of the outsiders, who continued to pour in, filling the starry sky with their pitch-black cubes. Increasing pressure radiated out in all directions. Soon, Meng Hao and Yuan Jian appeared in the southeastern part of the seventh mountain and sea, in a location that was very quiet. Off in the distance was an area full of hundreds of black cubes. They floated about in the starry sky, lightning dancing across their surfaces. It was just possible to see the images of outsiders passing into and out of the cubes. They almost seemed to be forming a spell formation. "The Vale of the Godgrave is up ahead," said Yuan Jian. "It's a spatial rift within which rest the ruins of an ancient battlefield. Countless strands of divine will exist inside, which can kill you before you even notice them. The Vale of the Godgrave is one of the most dangerous places in the entire seventh mountain and sea. The last time I went in, I only managed to travel a short distance. By chance, though, I managed to get a drop of impure god blood. Even that was enough to instigate an incredible breakthrough in my fleshly body." Yuan Jian was under the protection of Meng Hao's divine sense. As they hovered there in the starry sky, no one other than perhaps a peak 6 essences Tao sovereign or a 7 essences paragon would be able to detect their presence. After the first heaven descended, this was the very first place to be occupied by the outsiders. I suspect that quite a few of the outsiders have already gone inside. Presumably, they are also interested in getting god blood. Meng Hao looked calmly off into the distance. He could sense the fluctuations of powerful experts coming from many of the black cubes. Furthermore, the spell formation formed by the cubes contained shocking power in and of itself. The area surrounding the Vale of the Godgrave was completely filled with outsiders. Although there were no 6 essences experts there were definitely 5 essence experts. Meng Hao had already identified 4 with his divine sense. And that didn't count any outsiders who had entered the Vale of the Godgrave, which was beyond the scope of what Meng Hao could survey with divine sense. Meng Hao turned to look at Yuan Jian and said, "Brother Yuan, this place is clearly very dangerous. I think you should wait for me here." Yuan Jian hesitated for a moment before determination gleamed in his eyes, and he shook his head. "The 33 heavens aren't even sparing the mortals in this war. Clearly, they plan to wipe us all out. They want to exterminate the bloodlines of all living beings in the mountain and sea realm. As the saying goes, if the nest is overturned, none of the eggs survive." Yuan Jian clenched his hands into fists. "I need to get stronger. I need to have a cultivation-based breakthrough. I have a body refinement magic which can use god blood to sacrifice some life force in exchange for 100 years of a Tao realm fleshly body. I, Yuan Jian, am an echelon cultivator. Even if I can only live for 100 years after stepping into the Tao, I have to live up to my place in the echelon." Yuan Jian's eyes shone brightly, and his pupils seemed to flicker with flames. Chapter 13:26, Entering the Vale of the Godgrave. "Brother Meng, I'd like to request that you let me go with you into the Vale of the Godgrave. Don't let me be a burden, you can even ignore me. I only request that you get me inside. Once there we can part ways and I'll go off on my own to search for my good fortune. This is my choice, so whether I live or die has nothing to do with you, Brother Meng. I won't infect your karma. You and Jian just want a chance to search for my path of good fortune. If I live, fine. If I die, fine. I was born in the mountain and sea realm and I grew up in it. I'll give my blood, my cultivation, everything about me, to repay that debt. Yuan Jian's bitter smile was tinged with madness. The things he had seen and experienced recently in the seventh mountain and sea were hundreds of times more tragic than what Meng Hao had seen so far. He had witnessed 3 planets destroyed, and had watched as innumerable lives were ended. He saw one sect after another exterminated, wiped out by the outsiders. He had even seen people being eaten alive. Out of all his family, his clan, and his sect, he was the only survivor, therefore he now lived for revenge. Meng Hao looked silently at Yuan Jian for a moment, then turned to leave. "Just keep up," he said. Then he transformed into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. Clearly, he was choosing not to sneak in, but to fight his way through in broad daylight. After all, this was the mountain and sea realm, not the outsider's first heaven. Rumble! The instant Meng Hao charged forth and began to fight, Yuan Jian rapidly began to grow larger in size. Apparently there was a bit of god blood inside of him, pumping through his veins, leading to a shocking growth in fleshly body power. Astonishingly, it took only an instant for Yuan Jian to turn into a huge giant that took a step forward, following Meng Hao into the fray. 2 men, 2 echelon cultivators, 2 beams of light, shot forth like unsheathed swords. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the 2 of them stabbed into the outsiders, spell formation. Meng Hao's cultivation base was so powerful that only Dao sovereigns could hope to stand up to him. In the moment that he began to fight, vast numbers of outsiders began to pour out from the black cubes and charge toward him in attack. At the same time, shocking fluctuations began to emanate from the cubes as streams of divine sense sped forth to attack him. Further off in the distance were 3 heavens shaking, earth-shattering 5 essences auras that instantly veered toward Meng Hao to block his path. Meng Hao gave a cold harumph. Killing intent flickered in his eyes as he looked at the hosts of the incoming outsiders, with their vicious expressions and murderous auras. Waving his sleeve, he summoned the Paragon Bridge, which crushed down onto them. Instantly, blood-curdling screams rang out, and the starry sky around Meng Hao shattered. This one single attack crushed everything in its path. No less than 1,000 outsiders were instantly smashed, their fleshly bodies shattered, their nascent divinities destroyed. All of the other outsiders who witnessed this gasped, and their faces fell. Instantly, they began to back up in shock. Dao Sovereign. Damn it, in the mountain and sea realm, Dao Sovereigns are supposed to be as rare as phoenix feathers or Qilin horns. How could there be one here? Why haven't the 2 exalted Dao Sovereigns from our first heaven come to stop this person? The shocked outsiders were so terrified that they didn't dare to get any closer. In fact, they backed up to let him pass. As for Yuan Jian, even though he had an incredibly high opinion of Meng Hao, and had even seen what he did earlier to the outsiders attacking Planet Tiger Cage, witnessing this left him shocked. Looking at Meng Hao's back as he led the way, Yuan Jian realized that, although he wasn't necessarily physically imposing, there was something spectacular about him. It was as if the war for the mountain and sea realm might not necessarily end with them being wiped out. However, even as the outsider cultivators backed up, the streams of divine will emanating from the hundreds of black cubes came together into a shocking convergence that blasted toward Meng Hao. This amalgamation of divine will was so powerful that even Dao sovereigns who encountered it would likely shy away in fear. It transformed into an enormous face which filled the starry sky and lunged toward Meng Hao as if to consume him. So what if you're a Dao sovereign? Screw off. The voice which shouted out was not the voice of a single outsider, but rather the conjoined voices of hundreds of them. The sound of it echoed out, rocking the starry sky, causing the void to tremble and crushing down with a will of complete defiance. "Scram!" screamed the conjoined voices of the outsiders. As for all of the other outsiders who were observing from off to the side, their eyes began to glow brightly as they waited for Meng Hao's momentum to be broken, and for him to be forced backward. Meng Hao's expression was calm, but his eyes flickered coldly. It was at this point that his own divine sense exploded out toward the face converged from divine will. His divine sense transformed into a huge fist, which punched out viciously. BO1 The fist slammed into the face, shattering it into pieces, and causing a boom to ring out that shook heaven and earth. Cracking sounds rang out as fissures snaked out through the starry sky. They were like dragons shooting out in all directions, and when they hit the outsiders, screams rose up. There was no chance for the outsiders to flee, and many of them were instantly ripped apart. At the same time, miserable shrieks echoed out from the hundreds of black cubes. Rumbling sounds could be heard as each and every one of the black cubes shattered, and the outsider cultivators inside were eradicated. From a distance, the scene which was playing out was completely and utterly shocking. More gasps could be heard as the surviving outsiders fell back even further, so terrified of Meng Hao that they were shaking. Before they had come to the mountain and sea realm, they had viewed themselves as above everyone and looked down derisively at the mountain and sea realm. They couldn't wait for the chance to start slaughtering the immortals for fun. But after seeing Meng Hao's terrifying performance, memories from their ancestors were slowly being unlocked inside of them, memories that had been sealed within their bones, hidden within their souls. Memories of how their ancestors had been conquered by the paragon immortal realm. Meng Hao's face was cold as he looked around. Due to the sheer number of outsiders present, it would be difficult to kill them all, even with the current level of his cultivation base. However, as he glanced about, all of the outsiders upon whom his gaze fell backed up, trembling. He snorted coldly, advancing again, and no one dared to get in his way this time. They all fell back to make way for him. However, as he passed by, they would form ranks once again behind him. It was almost like Meng Hao was surrounded by a huge circle of empty space. Despite the fact that he was clearly surrounded, the ones who were terrified were the outsiders, not him. Yuan Jian followed directly behind Meng Hao. The scene which he was watching unfold in front of his eyes had his blood pumping. Glancing around coldly as he proceeded along, Meng Hao eventually caught sight of a dilapidated altar up ahead. It looked ancient, as if it had survived through countless years of time, leaving it corroded and falling apart. It wasn't complete. Only about 70% of its original structure remained. And yet, the starry sky around it rippled and distorted, emanating fluctuations that contained incredible pressure. Gradually, it became obvious that this altar was an entrance leading to some other dimension beyond. It was clear that previously, the altar had not been out in the open like this. Various restrictive spells and other obstacles had obviously been in place. However, after the outsiders arrived, they had cleared the area, leaving the altar hovering out in the open in the starry sky. In front of the altar were 3 outsider cultivators with grim faces. They hovered there, staring at Meng Hao, emanating fluctuations of the 5 essences level. Although they were a far cry from a mountain and sea lord, they were close to the level of the boy Xiao Yihan. They looked on with flickering eyes as Meng Hao approached. The one in the middle had a horn jutting out of his head, and if you looked closely, you could see that it wasn't black but violet. He took a step forward, and then it became clear that he did not have the same murderous aura that the other outsiders did. He clasped hands and bowed to Meng Hao, saying, "I am Long Daisy of the Dao tribe of the First Heaven. Greetings, Dao Sovereign Meng." Meng Hao looked back coldly. The fact that this person knew who he was came as no surprise. In the initial moments of the invasion, he had clashed with the outsider paragon Igu of the First Heaven. Although most people in the mountain and sea realm had not been able to see what happened, the outsider experts certainly were watching and had seen the events unfold. The violet-horned outsider's eyes shone with a strange light as he slowly began to speak. "Dao Sovereign Meng, based on your cultivation base and powers of perception, you are certainly aware that the mountain and sea realm cannot possibly win this war. Even if the first heaven isn't a match for the mountain and sea realm, there is a second heaven and a third heaven, and in the end, 33 heavens. There is no hope for the mountain and sea realm. Although we 33 heavens wish to destroy all life in the mountain and sea realm, we also respect the powerful experts here. Fellow Taoist Meng, if you would agree to follow the orders of the first heaven to join us in our campaign, then I can guarantee the safety of you and your clan, and can promise that you won't be harmed." A wise man submits to the circumstances. Fellow Taoist Meng, surely you understand the truth of that old saying. Not only can your clan be saved, but anyone else you wish can join us as well. The first heaven won't kill them. All you need to do is become a Tao slave of the first heaven. Compared to freedom, what meaning is there in death? In response to his words, Yuan Jian remained silent. Although he trusted Meng Hao, the offer made by this outsider was something that would stir even his heart, albeit only a bit. After all, he had no clan left. He had nothing. However, back when his clan and sect had still existed, if he had been given this choice, he couldn't be sure what he would have chosen. That line of thinking caused a spark of fear to rise up within him. Chapter 13:27. nothing more than a demonic beast. Trying to seduce me into being a turncoat? Meng Hao asked coolly. His expression was calm, but a flicker of derision could be seen in his eyes. You don't qualify to try something like that. Only an outsider who was out of the loop would talk to Meng Hao in such a way. If this person had been Paragon Igu, who was aware of who exactly Meng Hao was, he would never have uttered such words. Back in the days of the Paragon Immortal realm, even when the entire world had crumbled into pieces, its people, despite being broken and dying in the mountain and sea realm, refused to bow their heads in compliance to the 33 heavens. If that was the case back then, how much more so would it be the case now, when the mountain and sea realm had grown strong and was carrying on the legacy of the Paragon Immortal realm? To bow one's head in compliance would be a betrayal of one's people, one's home, and one's everything. To become a Tao slave, where life and death were not under one's own control, where one had no freedom. What would be the point of being alive? When Yuan Jian heard Meng Hao's response, he suddenly felt very calm. As for the violet-horned outsider, he gazed deeply at Meng Hao for a moment, then laughed softly, as if he wasn't very surprised. Then he and the other two outsiders stepped back to make way. If that is your wish, Tao Sovereign Meng, and considering that we can't stop you, then we will permit you to enter the Vale of the Godgrave. Please go ahead. The violet-horned outsider smiled and gestured for Meng Hao to walk past. Yuan Jian breathed a sigh of relief. The pressure he felt from these 3-5 essences outsiders made him realize how insignificant he was. Although he felt relieved, he gritted his teeth petulantly and told himself that even if it was more risky, he had to get into the Vale of the Godgrave. However, just when Yuan Jian was about to proceed forward, he realized that Meng Hao hadn't moved an inch. A strange expression had appeared on Meng Hao's as he looked at the three outsiders, and he began to laugh. Did you three practice your cultivation wrong and turn into retards, or were your brains always defective? He suddenly took a step forward, and when his foot landed, his energy surged wildly, as if a giant had stomped down onto the starry sky. It was like the crashing of an ocean of waves. This is the mountain and sea realm, not the first heaven. Everything here belongs to the mountains and seas, not you people. Just because you're standing around here doesn't mean I need your permission to come and go, does it? The three outsiders' hearts began to quiver. It felt as if mountains were crushing down onto them, as if the heavens were suppressing their hearts. Their faces fell and they quickly backed up. You think that when I show up, you can just step back and make way for me? The mountain and sea realm and the first heaven are at war. As for you three, what makes you so confident that I won't just kill you? Meng Hao threw his head back and laughed. Then he took 3 steps forward, each one of which caused him to erupt with extraordinary power. The sheer towering majesty was almost impossible for onlookers to take in, and the pressure he emanated crushed down with infinite force. A tempest sprang up, sweeping in all directions and crushing might bore down onto the three outsiders. The mere upsurge of energy caused everything to shake violently, and the three outsiders' minds were reeling as blood sprayed out of their mouths. The scales on their bodies even began to explode as they fell back a great distance. Meng Hao, how dare you? If you only stuck to killing some of our lesser tribe members, then whatever. They aren't in the Tao realm, so they don't count as successors in the first heaven. But if you kill us Tao realm experts, your clan will definitely be placed on the 33 heavens, list of clans to be exterminated. You're going to get your whole clan exterminated, Meng Hao. Do you really dare to attack us? Pipe down, Meng Hao said coolly, his energy crushing down with a booming sound. The 3-5 essences outsiders trembled, and one experienced a complete explosion of all the scales on his body, after which his entire tail shattered. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and when Meng Hao took a 5th step, he screamed and exploded. A majestic 5 essences outsider was crushed like a twig by Meng Hao's divine sense and cultivation base power. Only 2 remained. The violet-horned outsider was holding out better than the other, who coughed up a mouthful of blood as his flesh was shredded. Even as he let out a despairing howl, Meng Hao took a 6th step. Rumble! The outsider's body twisted, as though some enormous hand were squeezing down on it. It was crushed into a pulp, completely dead. With 6 steps, Meng Hao had killed 2 powerful enemies to shocking effect. The violet-horned outsider's face was pale, and he let out a howl as he suddenly began to grow. His appearance completely changed. Astonishingly, what now appeared in front of Meng Hao was a 3,000-meter-long black lizard. His long black horn glowed with violet light, and he looked boundlessly fierce. This was the true form of the outsiders from the first heaven. They looked less like cultivators and more like animals. At the most, they were like demonic beasts. The 3,000-meter-long lizard roared mightily as flames burst out from his body. However, instead of charging Meng Hao, he fled in the opposite direction at high speed. "I guess I gave you too much credit," Meng Hao said, eyeing the lizard coldly. "You're just an animal, and yet I tried to explain things to you as if you were a cultivator." With that, he took a seventh step. The instant that seventh step descended, Meng Hao's energy reached an indescribable level. The power of the mountains and seas rumbled out, filling the entire area. It was as if the will of the mountain and sea realm had been driven away by Meng Hao and his power. The only thing present was mountain and sea power, with none of the realm's will. It was as if that power was under the complete control of Meng Hao's will. His will was superseding the heavens and replacing the Tao. Superseding the heavens and replacing the Tao, this is impossible. The violet-horned lizard was filled with terror and shock. What he was seeing was so impossible that he couldn't think, and his heart filled up with complete despair. All of a sudden, he experienced a vision. Images rose up, the memories of his ancestors which were concealed in his blood. He saw his ancestors in one of the lower realms beneath the Paragon Immortal realm. He saw them, acting as mounts for immortals. In the end, that was the last thing he ever saw, as Meng Hao's surging energy superseded the heavens and replaced the Tao. It became an explosive will of destruction that, in the blink of an eye, completely crushed the gigantic lizard's soul out of existence. Boom! He was completely and utterly eradicated. The other surrounding outsiders gaped in shock at what they had just witnessed, and trembled as they stared at Meng Hao in complete and utter terror and disbelief. "Scram!" Meng Hao said, glaring at them. He was well aware that, considering the vast number of outsiders present, it wouldn't be an easy task to simply wipe them out, not even with the aid of the power of the mountains and seas. Right now, these outsiders were completely shaken, so the best thing to do wasn't to kill them, it was to plant a seed inside of them. That seed was a seed of terror, a seed that would eventually topple their hearts. His voice was like a cudgel that swept out and slammed into the hearts and minds of the outsiders. It was like a bolt of lightning that destroyed their courage and wiped away their will to fight. Fear of Meng Hao overwhelmed them, and screams could be heard as they scattered, fleeing in uncoordinated chaos. Note from Deathblade. This chapter is a bit short because it was the fourth update of the day by Jin, and on Mid-Autumn Festival at that. Chapter 1328, Veil of the Godgrave. Yuan Jian watched blankly as all of this happened. He gazed at the spot where the three outsiders had just died. He looked at the other outsiders, who were fleeing madly in all directions. Finally, he looked back at Meng Hao. Meng Hao's expression was grim as he eyed the retreating outsiders, and then took a step toward the altar. Yuan Jian hesitated for a moment before saying, "You know, it might waste a bit of time, but we could still kill at least 30% of these fleeing outsiders." Meng Hao turned and replied, "Killing people isn't as effective as killing hearts. The key to war is not just victory in battle, it lies within the spirit. They've lost their courage because I crushed their hearts. Without spirit, these outsiders will become the first stepping stone in raising the morale of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm." Yuan Jian revered Meng Hao but still had an opinion to express. Only one victory, or an impressive display by one powerful person, is probably not enough to make that happen. "You're right, and that's why I need to get into the Veil of the Godgrave as soon as possible to get that god blood." Meng Hao stepped onto the altar and looked up into the starry sky and the giant land mass that was the first heaven. In that moment, a flickering flame of madness could be seen in his eyes. "Let me ask you a question," Meng Hao murmured softly. "Imagine what would happen if the outsiders from the first heaven looked up and saw their entire world shattering into pieces and then falling down out of the sky. After that, do you think that their spirits, their hearts, and their courage could remain intact?" His words were spoken in a quiet tone, but the meaning behind them was astonishing enough to rock heaven and earth. Yuan Jian gasped, "You!" He felt almost as if he had been struck by lightning and could hardly speak. Meng Hao closed his eyes. "The key to winning a war is destroying your enemy's spirit. To these outsiders, the first heaven is their home and their spirit." With that, he vanished into the altar. Yuan Jian was trembling, not from fear, but from excitement and anticipation. Meng Hao's words echoed in his mind, and he could truly imagine what it would be like if he was in the middle of fighting the outsiders, then suddenly looked up to see the first heaven crumbling into pieces and falling out of the sky. To him, it would be something completely exhilarating and galvanizing. In sharp contrast, the outsiders would find it an utter catastrophe. // The Veil of the Godgrave. It really was a shattered portion of an ancient battlefield. That was the only thing which existed there. Not even the will of the mountain and sea realm could be detected. It was as if the only thing that existed in this place was an all-pervasive will to fight. In almost the exact same instant that Meng Hao entered the dimension, he heard the sounds of countless voices echoing in his ears like thunder. Fight! It was a voice belonging, not to any individual entity, but rather, the dimension itself, and the powerful will to fight that had existed in this place for countless years. It was like an undying soul throwing its head back and howling, consumed with the desire to slaughter its way through the heavens, the starry sky, and all lands. If Meng Hao's divine will were not as strong as it was, being at 80% of a paragon's, that will to fight would have incited him to instantly attack something. But now, it was simply a slight stimulation that hardly affected him. However, as soon as Yuan Jian appeared, he began to shake, and his face drained of blood. Meng Hao waved his hand, and Yuan Jian recovered. After looking around, he turned to face Meng Hao. "Brother Meng, I can do this myself." With that, he clasped hands and then sped off in another direction, eyes gleaming with determination and decisiveness. Meng Hao watched Yuan Jian leave the area of protection he had offered, and could see both the difficulty with which he did so, and also the mad desire within his soul that drove him to such lengths. Meng Hao sighed. Yuan Jian had his own path to follow. Meng Hao understood that, and thus would not intervene. He turned his head and looked off into the distance. The soil here was black, and littered with countless corpses. Some had already petrified into stone, while others were still in a state of decay. In fact, the further one proceeded into the depths of the valley, the more slowly things seemed to be rotting and decaying. The veil of the Godgrave was ring-shaped, with the outer areas being safer, and the danger increasing the closer one got to the center. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal, but thunder boomed in the air up above, and countless lightning bolts crashed down, almost like a rain of lightning. And yet, what boomed loudest in his ears was not thunder, but rather that echoing call to fight in battle. This place was like a heaven-shaking and earth-shattering sea of lightning, within which could be seen shadowy figures fighting each other. Normally, the rain of lightning which was pounding down would destroy everything beneath it, but in this case, the battle was so awe-inspiring that the effects of the lightning were negligible, whereas the intensity of the combat wreaked havoc upon all heaven and earth. In one location, Meng Hao spotted an enormous giant made of lightning, which crackled with boundless electricity as it strode to and fro fighting invisible enemies. Further off, he saw war chariots flying about. As the lightning fell, it pierced through the chariots, and yet they passed through the sheets of lightning as if they weren't even there. There were cultivators, too, locked in magical combat, the sound of which transformed into a call to battle that caused everything to tremble. On the ground could be seen enormous, 3,000-meter-long beasts, as well as cultivators wearing crude, ancient robes. There were also mighty mountains and rivers, which seemed to be in a constant state of flux, rising, falling, and changing course with every passing moment. Most disturbing of all were the illusory cities that popped in and out of existence, a sight that filled the heart with shock. However, what was more surprising than all of that was what existed in the very center of the valley. After sending his divine sense out to cover everything, Meng Hao was able to see that there in the center were two mountains. Except they weren't actually mountains, but giants. Each giant was fully 300,000 meters tall, with rough skin that was covered in complex magical symbols. Most notable were the stars which could be seen on their foreheads. Those stars were gray, as if they had lost all life force. Even still, the corpses of these two giants had not rotted away, but instead had transformed into mountains. Apparently, some sort of magical technique had been used on them, shrinking them down to only a portion of their true size. As soon as Meng Hao saw the two giants and the rest of the dimension, he immediately thought back to the ruins of immortality in the ninth mountain, to that enormous tree he had seen, and the land mass beneath it, which was the corpse of a giant. 1. Meng Hao saw the corpse in the ruins of immortality back in chapter 865 and 866. The feeling Meng Hao got from the aura of that corpse was very similar to the feeling he got from these two giants. The only difference was the disparity in size. Are these gods? Meng Hao flickered into motion, entering into the world of lightning. He walked along casually, expression calm. With every step he took, endless amounts of lightning crashed down, and yet none of it even touched him. The illusory war chariot sped toward him with a towering desire to fight, but Meng Hao didn't dodge. He let them come, and they passed right through him. As he walked along, he saw shocking beasts roaring, giants swinging their fists, and countless other creatures and beings. He saw corpses beneath his feet. At first most of the corpses were petrified stone, but more and more rotting corpses appeared, until everything was a mass of putrefying flesh. Soon, he was passing through from the outer region of the Vale of the Godgrave into the central area. None of the illusory entities here had any effect on him. Neither did the explosive pressure, which felt like nothing more than a cool breeze to him. Occasionally he would stop in place to observe the illusory fighting going on around him. Often, his eyes would then flicker as if he had gained new enlightenment. After a few days passed, Meng Hao was in the central region of the Vale of the Godgrave, where he caught sight of a corpse. Although it was buried in the ground beneath his feet, the entire area was being struck by so much lightning that some of the skin had become visible. It was a giant, at least 30,000 meters tall. Meng Hao knelt down and smacked the ground with the palm of his hand. A boom echoed out, causing the soil in the area to disintegrate and reveal the enormous corpse. He placed his right hand on top of the giant's head, and in the blink of an eye, the giant's face turned crimson. A moment later, it then turned pale as a drop of blood flew out of its forehead and into Meng Hao's hand. He looked thoughtfully at the golden drop of blood. Finally, he shook his head and said, "Too many impurities, not pure blood." With that, he put the golden drop of blood away and proceeded along. Eventually, he reached the very center of the Vale of the Godgrave. This area could be considered a restricted area for cultivators, a place where very few people could ever enter. 7 days passed, during which time Meng Hao traveled to many places within the Vale of the Godgrave, searching high and low until he had collected fully 100 drops of impure blood. He had even inspected the 2 gigantic corpses, from which he extracted some high-quality god blood. However, all of that was not enough to experience the breakthrough he was aiming for. On the other hand, Yuan Jian had found his good fortune, and his fleshly body was currently experiencing heaven-shaking, earth-toppling transformations. Meng Hao searched even longer but couldn't find any more god blood. His face darkened, and he felt disappointed but at the same time suspicious. I refused to believe that the outsiders would have the Vale of the Godgrave so heavily locked down, and yet not send any of their forces inside. There must be outsiders in here, with the ones on the outside acting as Dharma protectors. Well then, where are they? Meng Hao flickered into motion, flying up into the air until he reached a high point where he could look down on all the lands below. What he saw caused him to tremble, and a strange light to shine in his eyes. What he saw was that the lands that comprised the Vale of the Godgrave were actually about the same size as the giant upon whose back had grown the enormous tree in the ruins of immortality in the 9th mountain and sea. In fact, the Vale of the Godgrave was actually a bit larger than that. However, what was most shocking to Meng Hao was that the shape of the land itself resembled a face. The highest mountain was the nose of that face, and the deepest valley was formed by the mouth. Furthermore, in the forehead position, 8 stars were visible, very faint, but still flickering with light. Each one of those stars was emanating fluctuations that caused Meng Hao to tremble. 1. This footnote contains some spoilers regarding Renegade Immortal. Yes, these are the same ancient gods referred to in RI. In that novel, the cultivation system is based on stars, and an 8-star god would be somewhat analogous to the Tao Lord or Tao Sovereign level in ISSTH. "That's it," he said, eyes shining brightly.